If you run your tongue behind the back of your front teeth like this, you might have smooth teeth, or you might feel a little scoop, kind of like a spoon. That can be a sign of native ancestry. I'm going to explain more. If you've taken a DNA test and the percentage was there, or maybe it was 0, and you're like, but I still remember hearing my grandma say we have native ancestry, and you're not sure if you're just a Cherokee princess, there's actually something you can look at in your DNA results that is not a percentage that will definitively prove native DNA, native heritage. There's also paper changes that have happened in the US Census. Wealthy white families claiming Pocahontas ancestry were accepted as white. But actual Native Americans who had documented tribal connections and community ties were rejected and reclassified as Black or colored. I'm going to show you all of this information. I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel, where we talk about American identity and family stories. This is a big compilation. I'm going to be showing you 7 different videos I did that have to do with finding hidden native ancestry and how to understand your family story and your records and all of that. So stick around, because I think this will help a lot of you who are just beginning your journey, trying to confirm those family stories or trying to understand what happened on your DNA test. Let's jump in and look at your teeth. Ten years ago, I went to a new dentist here in Nashville and went through the whole routine, had 0 cavities, which was awesome. But he told me just in passing that I had shovel teeth. And I was like, excuse me? He's like, you have shovel teeth. And I didn't really get any more information than that. I think I just was kind of like, oh, okay, thank you, sir. and then I went home and I was trying to figure out what the heck are shovel teeth. So shovel-shaped incisors are a particular kind of a tooth. They have a curved hollow back that resembles, well, a shovel. I was asking my husband about his teeth because, teeth are weird. You're used to how your teeth feel in your mouth. I guess I never thought about there being variations on that. I mean, obviously there's different kinds of teeth, but I asked him, well, when you put your tongue like against the back of your teeth, don't you feel it curving? He's like, no, it's totally flat and straight. I'm like, no way. Nobody has flat teeth like that. And he's like, yeah, mine are flat. What is remarkable about these is it's such an ancient trait that connects us to some of the first people who walked across the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia, what is now Siberia, into North America. So these early migrants carried with them not just their tools and their cultures, but also the genes that shaped their teeth. So today, these shovel-shaped incisors are still common among Native American and Asian populations. This isn't just a story, though, about ancient migrations. I talk about family stories on this channel, American identity, ancestry. So these teeth are also the story of people who make up America today, like myself, people whose identities are complex and layered and often defy easy categorization. So consider the Melungeons, for example. I've done a couple videos exploring Melungeon heritage and my ties to that community. So the Melungeons are a group that has intrigued and baffled historians for generations. Who are they? Where did they come from? They've been described as a triracial community with European, African, and Native ancestry. And there was a story that I came across, and this is how I started piecing together the shovel teeth and the Melungeon heritage that I seemed to have connection to, but didn't really know much about it. So growing up in Hancock County, Tennessee, and I live here in Nashville, Wayne Winkler didn't know much about the Melungeons. He just knew his family had roots in the area and that there were stories about a mysterious group of people who didn't quite fit the usual racial categories. So I am reading from an article called "The Past is Written on Your Face." And it said his parents moved to Detroit from the South in the 1950s. But each summer when he was a child, he would return to Hancock County to visit his father's family. And he saw a newspaper article that jumped out at him, and it said, quote, "One of the most fascinating mysteries in Tennessee lore concerns the unknown origins of the Melungeons." And it began describing them as, quote, "a dark-skinned people who some romantics compared in appearance to Othello." And Othello is a Shakespearean character. So as a boy, Wayne gets excited about this romantic, mysterious group of people. So he asks his father about them. Later, after his father refused to give any details, his mother divulged, it says, that his paternal grandfather or his paternal grandmother was in fact Melungeon, so his dad's mom. And it goes on to say, quote, which means your dad is Melungeon, she said, which means you're Melungeon. And he said he had assumed that his family was mostly Indian based on how they looked and how they described themselves. And when he asked why he had always identified his background as Native American and not Melungeon, this is what his father said. His father said, quote, everybody knows what an Indian is. It takes all day to explain what a Melungeon is. So the connection here for me was this article goes on to talk about shovel teeth. There's the rub. The Melungeons were and are, for most of their history, a mystery, even to themselves. And I think that's true of a lot of people that have that multi-layered, mixed heritage identity here in the United States or wherever you are. These teeth are more than just bones in our mouth. They're like time capsules, preserving a record of ancient migrations and family connections. Today, you can still find shovel-shaped incisors in many Native American and Asian populations, which I think is interesting. So the story doesn't end there, though. The teeth connect us not just to the distant past, but to specific communities that have long intrigued historians and anthropologists alike. Take the Melungeons, for example, a group that has been described as one of the most mysterious and misunderstood in American history. And I will go on to say one of the most important parts of the American story. If you learn the Melungeon story, you come to understand why our country is the way that it is. Because the Melungeon experience straddles the British colonial rule here and post-revolutionary era, and you see these changes happening in this microcosm of this triracial community. For centuries, the origins of the Melungeons have been debated. Were they Native American, European, African descent, mixed European and runaway enslaved people? What we do know, though, are that many Melungeons do have those shovel teeth, those shovel-shaped incisors, a trait that strongly suggests significant Native American heritage. Richard Scott, who's an anthropologist at the University of Reno at Nevada, pointed out that 98% of Native Americans have this trait, making it a key marker in tracing their ancestry. Now, I don't know how he came up with that. His credentials sound pretty good, but I don't know how he comes up with that number, what that testing looked like. But that's a pretty significant. I mean, 98%, right? So the connection to the Melungeons opens a fascinating chapter in the story of American identity. The truth, as is often the case in history, is likely a complex blend of all of the theories that come with the Melungeon story. But the shovel-shaped incisors offer a tangible clue, a direct link to Native lineage, the people who were among the first to call this land home. So what's remarkable to me is how these teeth, which I think can be so easily overlooked just in general, can provide a window to our past that goes beyond the written record. And as a historian, a trained historian, a history teacher by trade, I love the written record. I love the primary sources, but I love when we can even go beyond that and go beyond the written record and go to oral stories or go to other markers that we can look at to kind of help fill in the blanks. I think it reminds us that our identities are not just shaped by the stories we tell or the names that we carry, but by the very physical traits we inherit. And it's not just Melungeons who carry this legacy. These teeth are also found in other groups across the Americas and Asia, linking them to that same ancient migration. I think for those of us who study American identity or study our own family story, these kinds of connections are particularly important, meaningful, moving. I think it forces us to look beyond the surface and consider the hidden, deeper layers, and maybe even looking at our identity and our family stories as a prism. And when you look through a prism, you look this way, the light hits differently than when you look this way. And, I love Ancestry.com. I love looking at my DNA test updates, even though I also hate it. But bringing all of this in, bringing that information, bringing the stories bringing your DNA test, bringing the paper trail. What about your teeth? We need to look more holistically when we're studying our family story, our American identity, and the history that we tell ourselves. When we're exploring the origins of traits or what they point to, like shovel-shaped teeth, we're not just learning biology, we are uncovering the lived experiences of generations who came before us, who we're connected to forever. Teeth, our bones, our very DNA, they all carry the story of those who walked the earth long before us and who had to exist for us to be here. And to go back to the article with Wayne Winkler, he said, quote, for him, celebrating Melungeon identity or parsing who is or who is not an authentic member of the group is less important than the perspective that he gains from seeing his part in an expansive ancestral puzzle despite its missing pieces. Quote, it's who I am because it's who my father was, he says. To be able to stand up in front of a group of people and say that I'm the descendant of a Melungeon, a term full of baggage that my grandmother was taught to keep quiet about. I'm content with that. And if you'd like to see any of the other videos I've done researching my Melungeon roots and the Melungeon story here in the United States, I'd love to have you join me on those. I'll leave a link on the screen and below. Otherwise, we'll talk soon. Hidden in your results, separate from the ethnicity estimate, separate from the percentages that you get, there is a piece of DNA that doesn't change. It doesn't dilute over generations, and it doesn't get erased. So even if your test says 0% Native American ethnicity, you could still have undeniable proof of Native ancestry. Millions of people are being told they don't have any indigenous DNA when their DNA test actually proves otherwise. The test wasn't necessarily built to find it, but I'm going to show you where to look. Because I went through this myself, and when I finally found the real proof, it changed everything. This happens all the time. Someone takes a DNA test expecting to see a certain ancestry, and in this case, we'll say Native American ancestry, but when they check the results, nothing, 0%. Now, at this point, most people assume that the family stories were just wrong, and they might be. But DNA testing is more complicated than it seems. Now, there's a couple reasons why your test might not be showing a Native ethnicity, but we're going to dive deeper than ethnicity, so stick with me. Before I tell you where to look, I'm going to give you some other reasons why you might not be seeing the DNA showing up in the ethnicity. Your DNA is compared to existing samples in the company's database, and many Native American tribes have chosen not to participate in these genetic studies, so if they don't have the right references, you can't get matched to them. The second reason is that our DNA dilutes over generations. Ethnicity estimates are based on DNA from both parents, but over time the DNA gets shuffled and recombined. And if your native ancestor was born 6 or 7 generations ago, that DNA might not be visible anymore as a percentage, but there is another place where it will never disappear. Unlike ethnicity estimates, haplogroups trace deep ancestry. This is the real story of your lineage, and it goes back thousands and thousands of years. And here's the key. The DNA company may have already given you this information, but you just may not have checked the right section. Also, you may have taken a DNA test that doesn't provide the haplogroup information. So I'll show you the test I took and where you should look. Before I show you where to look for your haplogroups, I'm going to tell you basically what it is. So there are maternal haplogroups. This is a lineage you get from your mom's side, and paternal haplogroups that you get from your dad's side. There are maternal haplogroups that are connected to indigenous ancestry, and it is A, B, C, D, X, and possibly M. If you have one of these showing up on your maternal side, well, it means your mothers, and on and on and on. Passed down indigenous ancestry. It got passed down through the women in the line. This marker does not get diluted over time, so if you have it, you inherit it directly, even if it's very distant. Now, my story showed pretty low indigenous percentages when I first took my test. I wasn't sure what to expect. My dad's side is Southern Italian, and my mom's side is from Louisiana, and we weren't really sure what we were going to get. And so I took the 23andMe test. My mom took the 23andMe test. And before she passed away, my grandmother, my mom's mom, took a 23andMe test. Now, my grandmother's test only showed about maybe like a quarter Hispanic ancestry. Her haplogroup was C1C. And that meant my mom's haplogroup was C1C. And it meant my haplogroup was C1C. And it means I gave my daughters the haplogroup C1C. This is a proof of indigenous heritage that the ethnicity estimate may not show you. You can do the paternal haplogroups. I think they're Q and they're C. So if a male in your family has either Q or C, that's also a direct marker of Native American ancestry. And it would be passed down from father to son, father to son, father to son, regardless of what the ethnicity percentage is that you get on your test. So you definitely want to just check out some of the haplogroups. So now, how do you find your hidden indigenous ancestry? If your DNA test includes haplogroups, 23andMe is the one that I used. And if you want to grab a 23andMe test, I'll leave a link to those below. It will tell you your haplogroups, and I will show you what mine look like. Log into 23andMe. Don't worry about the Ancestry overview, but you're actually going to go down to all Ancestry reports and click that. And you're going to scroll down, and now it says all Ancestry reports, and it shows my maternal haplogroup because I'm a woman and biological woman, and I'm going to click that. I was really shocked by this because we don't, I don't have a connection to any of this heritage really at this point culturally, but it was really interesting to see something that basically it will never go away. It will never be diluted. So it says, Danielle, your maternal haplogroup is C1C. So it'll tell you your haplogroup, and then they'll give you some information, but honestly, it's more interesting to just Google it, I think. Okay, so I just want to Google C1C so I can just show you, and hopefully you can get excited to research this a little bit yourself. Okay, so let's jump over here. So the C1C, now I've actually found the AI to be usually totally wrong, but it's correct here that it originated, or often it originates in American ancestry, Native ancestry. Here is a paper about the sequencing of Mexican Americans and their Native American ancestry. And so here it says, in the case of the more abundant and widely distributed haplogroup C1, there are sub-branches of that C1b, C1c, and C1d, and mine was C1c. And it's super interesting to see these connections and how, again, even if the DNA percentages are small or gone at the point you're taking the test, there is this permanent connection to that ancestry here. So that was a paper I had read, which was super interesting. And then I really enjoyed DNA Explained. It's like an older blog. And she talks a lot about the Native American haplogroups. She was talking about that, this article in particular is about the high percentage of Native American DNA in the Mexican population, which is really interesting because I didn't even know that we had Mexican ancestry. And I guess, saying ancestry, it's like Mexican's not ancestry, it's a nationality, but ancestors who were in Mexico. And I believe that this is where this indigenous DNA comes from. So just to repeat, if your test doesn't have haplogroups, the Ancestry test is a great test, but as far as I know, it doesn't have haplogroups. The 23andMe does. I think there's a lot of value in that. You may have, your DNA test may have missed your native ancestry, but doesn't mean that the family story is necessarily wrong. You just need to look in the right place. So let me know if you took the 23andMe test, if you knew about the haplogroups, if something like this happened to you. I did have my dad take it, so I had the paternal one. And then I think I got his test deleted somehow, which was very stupid. But his test was really interesting because he's Southern Italian, but I think his haplogroup was Middle Eastern. I'll have to double check what it was. I think it was like J2 something. I think it's like an Egyptian haplogroup, which is interesting because it kind of just shows you the continuity in the genetic line of really where you came from a very long time ago. And I think that's really awesome. And if you'd like to dig into your native heritage a little bit more, check out my video on shovel teeth, which is a trait that 92% of Native American Indigenous Americans have. Let me know if you have it too. Otherwise, we'll talk soon. Over the last 2 years, I've been telling the stories that often get ignored. But lately, I've been facing an uphill battle behind the scenes of each video. My videos are getting flagged by YouTube when all I'm doing is sharing real history. If these stories have ever resonated with you or given you a new perspective, grab some Be a Good Ancestor merch and help me keep this channel going. Check out nytonashville.com. Following these little tidbits, it's like it brought me to such a crazy place. And so this is the version that my mom knew. This is the version of her grandmother that my mom knew and loves. Recuerdo de sus hijos. Remembered by his children, I think, or in memory of his children. I'm not sure. My Spanish is not good. I have her death record here. She's listed as Indian. I want to show you some of the court documents that I found. This is Choctaw Nation. Here's my ancestor, Eveline. And she's listed as half blood Choctaw.
and then they got kicked out again, so then they were denied citizenship. And there's not really any information about why, because... Hi, I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel, where we talk about American identity and family stories. And before we jump into the video, if you'd like to join me off YouTube, I'm really trying to focus on Patreon right now. That's where we can direct message, we can chat, share deep dives, share content that I can't show on YouTube, or I won't because they flag it. That's for real. That's crazy. So anyway, come on over at patreon.com/NYTN, or you could send me a coffee at coffee.com/NYTN13. So today's video, I finally paid to get my Ancestry account back on track. So I had let that lapse. I'm going to show you a way to save money on that, like a lot of money that I stumbled upon. So I'm going to show that when we get into my tree. But the next couple videos, I want to just go through my family tree with you. Literally no plan. Like, I want to do all the branches. Let me tell you, you can watch this if you don't have the same ancestry as me, of course, but odds are we probably share something in common. So if you have Italian ancestry, Irish ancestry, Mexican ancestry, Louisiana Creole heritage, if you have French heritage, if you have ancestry in New York, if you have ancestry in Texas, all of these places, I'm going to be doing deep dives on my tree and showing you what I'm doing. It's a mess for sure. So let's jump over to the tree, and I want to first show you a absolutely crazy way to save money on it. It's not sponsored. This is just me, one friend to another. I want to show you a way to save money on Ancestry. So let's hop over there. We're going to dive into my tree, but I use Rakuten. I think that's how it's called. And so they're not sponsoring me, although they should. Rakuten, sponsor me. I love you so much. You get cash back if you're going to like a store, and you can check and see if you have cash back from Rakuten. If you spent like $100 at Ancestry, right now they have 36% cash back. So I did it. I updated my Ancestry stuff when it was 6%, and I logged in today, and I was like, oops, because I spent like $200 to get the whole package for the 6 months. So I wish I had done 36% cash back. It's real, and you can get it as like a gift card, or they'll send to your PayPal, however you want. So I have a referral link for you to do this. It's totally free to sign up. I've been doing it for years. Let me just show you how it works if you click it. And again, I wish they were sponsoring me. They're not. So it's say cashback's activated. So now you go through the purchase process with Ancestry, and you're going to get that money back. It's so wild. So I'm going to put a link below. Please use that link. I think I get a referral for it, which would be so awesome, because I just love Rakuten so much. If you are like me and you let your tree lapse like a serious amount, because it's expensive. They changed something. I can't remember what it was that they changed. But it was like, I couldn't access any of my stuff without paying. And I was, okay, fine, I'll do it. I'll do it. Okay, so I want to go through my tree. Want to really go through a million branches of it. So I'm going to put some nice relaxing music on this. All right, let's hang out. So they're rating my tree a 7.6. I've never seen this. My tree deserves to be lower. So it's saying I have errors. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I really deserve a lower thing than a 7. I can promise you that. I have my mom's side and my dad's side. Now, my dad's side of the family, I have talked about on here, and I've done playlists on them. All his grandparents were immigrants from southern Italy, even though his ancestry test reflected a lot of Egyptian and Iranian. I'm gonna go on that side of the tree, not today, but we're gonna do that. We're gonna go through. And my mom's side, interesting, because this is my mom's mother. Her father is not living. I literally haven't updated. My grandfather died a long time ago, but that's not her biological dad, and we didn't know that until she took a DNA test. I have that video up in my DNA playlist. We're gonna talk about my mom's maternal side, but I would also like to dive into the side. So my grandmother's dad was Irish, and her mom was from Louisiana. So here's Lola. It's like the whole channel's been, kind of working on Lola. Lola's got a lot of names, okay? She has a lot of names. I want to go through her census records. And if you've been on the channel since I started, this is not new. I don't think I've ever really sat down and done it like this, okay? So she's my great-grandmother, and she was born Campty, Louisiana, and she died in Albany, New York. That's where I was born. So she was born in 1900, so when she was 10 years old, and the 1910 census was like, I think her first census. She must have missed the other one. And she's listed as Lola Soskar, which is weird and wrong. The enumerator, you remember, they're kind of doing the best that they can, but they got her first name wrong. But she went by Lola. And so she was 10 years old, and 1900, her birthplace was Louisiana, and her race, she was listed as mulatto, even though when we use that word now, well, we really shouldn't be using that word, but like, it's like one black parent, one white parent. That is not what was happening with her. It wasn't like she had one white parent, one black parent. She had a Creole parent, her dad, who had predominant African ancestry, but also was descended from the Chitimacha woman, Marie-Therese de la Grande Terre, which we'll go through there. And then her mom, Victoria Simone, or Simon, was Hispanic. So we'll go through all this. We'll show you. We'll just like work our way up. This always makes me feel like crying, to be honest. Did she attend school at 10? No, hasn't attended school. She cannot read, she cannot write. And where she came from, my mother's grandmother, how far she came. This woman, you know, ended up moving to New York and becoming a nurse's aide, and was a widow with 8 kids, and faced discrimination, faced hardship, went through World War II. And I'm here because of the choices that she made and her survival. So you want to see she couldn't read or write at 10 years old. Like, feel sad. Here's her parents, Alphonse Perrault, Victoria Perrault. So this is a French last name. Down there, they say Perrault. They eventually changed it to Perrault to kind of distance themselves from the colored side of the family. That's a story. And some of Lola's siblings are here. And so Hilary, there's a really interesting story about him. He was actually Victoria's son and not Alphonse's son. And I don't know all the details on that. Some cousins have helped me get records. My one cousin, Belinda, helped me get some records there. He was baptized because they're all Catholic, right? So I don't know who his father is. But there was a story that one of my great uncles told me that Hilary and Alphonse did not get along. So Hilary is Victoria's son. This would be his stepdad. And one day they got into an argument, and Lola was very close to him. Here's Lola down here. She was very close to her older brother. And one day Hilary and Alphonse get into an argument, and Hilary hops on a horse and rides off to Texas and was never seen again. That's how the story went. And so I've been trying to find him, and I've really struggled to find him. After a certain point, he kind of disappears. And so here's Lola's sister. Another sister here, Almentine, had a really sad story too. Someone reached out to me a couple years ago with a screenshot of like a family Bible, and someone was keeping the story, and that Almentine had, Mary Almentine, I think was her name, had married a man who was a lot older. He was Anglo, and I guess he was very abusive to her, and people believe that he, I don't know what I can say on YouTube, but he killed her. And so they left behind 2 kids that ended up staying with family in Louisiana and then moving out to Washington State. And I found the kids, some of them had already passed away. I don't know what happened to that side of the family. Alphonse Perrault Jr., I've got pictures of him, I've shared on here. Emile as well. And then Francis, and Albert was not born yet. So much information that you can get from this. I love looking at the census records here and seeing the information. You can see who lives nearby them, and too, which is super helpful, because especially in Louisiana, your neighbors are usually your family. Now, this is super interesting. Here, Lola is listed as white, okay? And it's very interesting because her parents, if we go back, I'm gonna go up here to her parents. So Alphonse and Julia Victoria. I do have some thoughts on this I'm gonna show you. So like, he was born 1800s. He's listed as mulatto here, so is she. And then 1900, he's listed as black. And it's crazy, this is my great-great-grandfather. It's crazy to see, like, how could you be listed as mulatto, black, and white just on alternate census records? So let's go back to Lola right here. This is my great-grandmother. And I don't put a lot of pictures up on here. Let's see, this is my picture. That's my hand right there. That one's made the rounds on the tree. And I don't know what else I have here. So this is Lola when she was I also shared this one. Actually, that's a reflection of me sharing it. But this is at my grandmother's house. And so this is the version that my mom knew. This is the version of her grandmother that my mom knew and loves. She's probably in her 70s here. So this is Lola here. And it's crazy to see like people saving it. Like, these family, that's awesome. Let's see what other pictures I have in here of Lola. Like I said, I don't really put a lot on, so I did that one. I think I uploaded this one too, and this was Lola's. Yeah, I uploaded it. 2014. I've been doing this. I've been doing this for a little bit. This is their wedding picture, and so Lola got married to my great-grandfather, and he was an Irish boy from Troy, New York, and he went out to Louisiana because he worked with planes, and so he was working with Delta, which started down the south. And so they got married, and I've shared this a zillion times, but I can't find their marriage license. So they got married April 13th, 1925. I know that from the back of wedding pictures, information's written. But as you could see, most of her census records, she's a woman of color, right? And he's white. And so the miscegenation laws, right? It would be legal for them to get married. I don't have a marriage license for them. I have called everyone, and I've messaged churches. I've tried to look at, like, I don't know if there's a paper thing for that. If it exists, I have not come across it yet. But I love this picture of them. Her wedding dress, she's wearing like a concho belt and probably silver with turquoise in it. And my grandmother always wore turquoise. And that's why I love to wear turquoise too. And it's a really pretty dress. Looks like it has ribbons in it. So that's their wedding picture. I don't know if I have any other ones on here. And here's Lola when she's like 16. So there's a bunch of hints, and I wanna follow some hints with you and see what happens. All right, so Alphonse is here. Here's Julia Victoria. I want to just jump around a little bit, but I want to show you a little bit of both of theirs. And you can let me know what you're interested in. Like if there's something like, dive into this, like I'd love to. So this is my great-great-grandmother. It's my second great-grandmother, Julia Victoria Simon. And there actually is a marriage thing for her. I have a couple documents, but she was marrying another person of color. And so their marriage was not illegal, right? It wasn't illegal. And so if we go through just a couple of her census records, her family was originally from Texas, and she is connected also to the Choctaw Apache tribe. But here she is listed as Black. And they were married in 1898. Can't read, can't write, does speak English. I'm not sure what her first language is. Her father's first language was Spanish, and her husband's first language was Creole. So I know that my family, the language I think that was mostly spoken was Creole. So this is my great-grandmother, Victoria, and her story is really weird and sad. Everybody's story is kind of weird and sad. I'm sure you guys have that too. But her father was Alberto Simon, and he was born in Louisiana, but he died in San Antonio. And there was actually a lot of connection between these two places, right? Because of El Camino Royale. And so, you know, people were traveling from Louisiana to Texas because really there's no border there. It's made up, right? These are places that are connected, and these communities, there was a lot of back and forth. And so his story is really interesting. He's listed as mulatto. At that time, obviously, we talked as mulatto was kind of a catch-all, right? They're like, we're not sure what to put you down as. If you seem kind of brownish, you are mulatto. So he was listed as mulatto, and he ended up moving to Texas. His wife had passed away. I'll have to check. I think he may have left her. But you can see here, as soon as he got to Texas, the name changes on this, and it's because it's phonetic. So in Louisiana, it was spelled Simon, but he's moving to San Antonio. He was a Spanish speaker, so now he's Albert Simon. It's spelled like that. And it's interesting, it puts his birthplace as Texas. There's some confusion with the documents, like was he born in Texas, was he born in Louisiana? But he's still listed as mulatto, and he married a woman named Margarita. And it says he sold vegetables, and he could read, he could write, he could speak English. And these are his kids, so these would be like half siblings for my great-grandmother, or my great-great-grandmother. We've gone through these, I think, a little bit on here, but it's really interesting. The records are a mess. So here it says his race. Now he's not mulatto, now he's listed as Spanish. And it says his father's birthplace is Canada. It's incorrect when I really dig into the records. He was also born in Texas. It says mother's birthplace, also Texas. And so this side of the family, there is really deep, like, Hispanic Texas heritage I was completely unaware of. And this is his tombstone. It's really, I feel like, just very traditional Catholic Hispanic tombstone. Alberto Simon Sr., 1850 to 1944. So this guy lived through a lot. He lived through 2 world wars, right? Or almost to the end of that. Recuerdo de sus hijos. Remembered by his children, I think, or in memory of his children. I'm not sure. My Spanish is not good. But I remember seeing that stone and being like, okay, so they really were Hispanic. So that would be my great-grandma Lola. That's her grandfather. I guarantee you she never met this man, didn't know anything about him. Same with her grandmother. There's no way she knew her maternal family at all. And I think that's why the Creole side is the side that, for as little as passed down to us, that was the most culture that she had, because it was her father's family and she's connected to her father's family in Louisiana, and, you know, did not have a connection to the Hispanic side, the Choctaw Apache side over here. And her, Lola's grandmother was Frances. This was a person that was missing for years. No one could find this woman. We knew her name from another record, but we couldn't find her in any census record. I'm like, it just doesn't make sense. You know, sometimes you find ancestors that are from like the 1600s. I'm like, why can't I find a woman from the 1850s in Texas? Amy Cross, who is an amazing genealogist, she's helped me a bunch, and look her up. She does great work, and she will work with you for such a good price. She had a suggestion because I was like, I cannot find this woman anywhere. And she said, you need to request Julia Simon's death record, because the long form will say her parents' names and where they were born. I was like, I literally never thought of that before. So I did that. I got the death record in the mail, and you won't believe it. It said Frances, and it said she was born in Texas. Now, the last name here is weird, and I want to tell you why this is so jacked up. So her last name is really Padilla, obviously, which is, you know, Hispanic last name, but got butchered on records, and it turned into like Patty, like all kinds of just crazy stuff. So there's a lot of Patty people with the last name Patty or Pardee in Louisiana that I'm kin to. They're Padillas. That's really what happened. But when you're going from like Spanish-speaking culture to, you know, French-speaking or Creole, and stuff gets changed, right? Kind of like the Ellis Island last name thing. So finding Frances was like a huge deal because it unlocks a huge part of my family, and I thank Amy Cross for that. So what was a big deal about finding Frances was that this is so interesting too, let me show you. So here she's listed as white, which is fascinating when you hear her story. So she was 2 years old. Here, Pathier, it's like, okay, I'm looking for Padilla. I was like, I'm not gonna find that. I found it. So her father was Antonio, and Eveline was her mother. Eveline's story is crazy. Like, all of these stories are crazy. I just want to take you down every single road. But I couldn't find Frances. She was 2 years old, and then she kind of disappeared. And I knew it was the right woman, and I wasn't sure what had happened to her. And talking with some older family members, they said that Lola knew her grandmother's name was Frances, Patty or Party or something like that, didn't really know. And they believed that she had gotten pregnant with Julia, Lola's mother, very, very young, and died in childbirth, which would jive with her not showing up on the census. I mean, she could have been like 13 getting pregnant and dying. And so, just an insane story. I have not found her grave. But then that jived with the lack of census records. And so this was a really long one. So a tip I would give you is, if you're looking for someone, if you can find the long form death certificate, if you can request it of their children, you may get information, confirmation, a lead, just to kind of help piece the picture together. So I want to show you Sharpeen Evelyn Goens. I have showed this story before, but this is really interesting. And so she's my 4th grandmother. I actually have her death certificate. Isn't that crazy? Some of the things I'm like, I can't find my own great-grandmother's marriage license, but I have my 4th grandmother's death certificate. And in part it's because people had kids so young at this time, at least for women. The men were sometimes a lot older. The distance between the generations is not that much. So this woman was alive when Lola was alive. So Lola's great-great-grandmother was alive, living in Indian country, actually, for a lot of time. I'm sure they knew nothing about her. Maybe they did. I don't know. But it's interesting. I have her death record here. And so it says Eveline, and here you're like, what is this? I think it's supposed to say like Patty, but it's really Padilla. She was widowed already at this point and said she died in 1918 and said she was born in Nacogdoches, Texas, right? So there's Natchitoches, Louisiana, El Camino, Royale, Nacogdoches, Texas over here. And her color or race, she's listed as Indian. But look, I have her parents' names here too. So I have the name of her father and the name of her mother. Her mother was Charlotte Drake. I think it was Charlotte Drake. And Jeremiah Goens. Let me tell you, this was a incredible hint to get when you go down. These last names are really prominent families. The Drake family was a really prominent family of color in Virginia. And the Goens family, of course, is one of the biggest families in America. There's a lot of Melungeon Goens, Redbone Goens, a lot of these groups. And Jeremiah Goens actually was, I think he was 7/8 Choctaw, because he had to go to court to try to get enrolled. They were registering all the Native Americans, and they had trouble. And so I have testimonies of people who knew him. So I want to show you a little about Sharpeen stuff. It's just cool, like following these little tidbits. It's like it brought me to such a crazy place. It brought me from, I was born in New York, and my grandmother was French, and now I'm like, wait a second, like look at all this stuff. The 1900 census, she's listed as Indian, Native American, and they were actually living in Indian territory. So the Goens family, though, were enrolled on the Dawes rolls for the 5 civilized tribes. And she was listed as Choctaw, and she was enrolled by blood. And, blood quantum is, but they had her blood quantum on here, and then they were kicked out. And then the state said, no, actually, they are Choctaw, you need to let them back in. And then they were kicked out again. The only thing I can piece together is that even though they had a lot of Choctaw blood, I think they also had a lot of like mixed heritage too. And that might have been a problem. I really don't know. I want to show you some of the court documents that I found. So this is Choctaw Nation. Here's my ancestor, Eveline. And they had like Padilla and 2 of her kids, Tasso and Reuben. And she's listed as half-blood Choctaw. And the kids are listed. I think the kids are listed as a little bit more because the father also was. But it was saying that they were in, they got kicked out, and here's the district that they were in. And then they were admitted again, and there was a court case, and I actually was able to find the information about the court case. And then they got kicked out again, so then they were denied citizenship. And there's not really any information about why, because the information seemed like overwhelming. So I'm like, well, I know I have Choctaw heritage. I'm fine with not enrolling in the nation. Like, that's fine. But I felt bad for them seeing this. Like, what happened here? I don't know. They have, evidence of their marriage. All the evidence was brought. And it was really cool to find these cards. I kind of want to do something with them. So her father was listed on her death certificate. And this is the guy, he was born in Mississippi. This is the one who actually had witnesses come to say, yes, he's Choctaw. He served as an interpreter for white people in the area, but it still was not enough to let his daughter be on the Dawes rolls. So let me see if I have that in here. I'll have to look for that court documentation. It might just be on my computer. I don't know if it's on. Oh, wait, here, controversy. Of course, my family has a million controversies. Controversy regarding Jeremiah Goens. So some claim it's possible that Philip and Odie Goens were invented by the children of Jeremiah Goens and Seraphina Drake to legitimize their bid to be enrolled in the Tribal Council of Choctaw Nation. It does not appear this is the case. I don't know if I've clicked this one. This is just people's notes. They're like called the archives. Okay, let me read this person's information about this, because the Goens family is a big family, and since it's like my 4th grandfather, it's like there's a lot of cousins, right? There's a lot of them. So I have the original court documents, which I'll have to find. But this lady or gentleman said they got copies and went through stuff, and they were able to prove that our family was not only part Choctaw, but that people were also enrolled in our family. This happened after they were initially died by the Dawes Commission because they said they didn't have evidence. They had to go back with testimony. This is the stuff I have from people who knew the family in Mississippi, and everybody said they were already Choctaw. Everybody knew them as that. And the Choctaw Nation lawyers and Dawes officials were not happy when the U.S. court granted our family citizenship. So then the Choctaw Nation appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and then they upheld the ruling. And then there was a new court created called the Choctaw-Chickasaw Citizenship Court, and they ruled that anybody who got citizenship through the U.S. court had to go through their new court, and that you couldn't use any evidence that was in the U.S. court could be accepted. It was like, well, they already gave all their evidence to the U.S. courts. Now all their proof of who they are, all the proof of who my family was, no longer was applicable. Like, it was still real, but you weren't allowed to use it. And it's like, well, that's weird. I forgot about this. I'm glad it's in here. The case was stamped denied. There was no mention of the Supreme Court ruling. It was just, that's what it was. I'm able to enroll in the Choctaw Apache tribe. That is not a federal tribe. It is a Louisiana tribe. I have a lot of cousins in that tribe. This is the federal Choctaw tribe. I probably would not do it because I don't have any connection to it. I feel like a little weird about doing that, but I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those things. I like to know where my family comes from. We do have Native ancestry and stories like that. So this is one line where some of that comes. I guess this video is getting kind of long, so I'll stop here. And maybe we'll pick up with a different part of the family tree, different ancestors entirely. But let me know what you think if you like this style video. And if you'd like to jump over to Patreon, I think I'm gonna upload some of the Choctaw documents over there on Patreon. So let me know what you think, and we'll talk soon. Wealthy white families claiming Pocahontas ancestry were accepted as white, but actual Native Americans who had documented tribal connections and community ties were rejected and reclassified as Black or colored. So if your last name was on this list, your Native ancestry claim was not only rejected, your birth certificate was now changed from Indian to colored. He believed that the Native American tribes in Virginia had intermarried with Black people generations ago. Therefore, anyone who claimed to have Native American ancestry, he said, was actually mixed race Black trying to pass as Indian to get around segregation laws. This was his theory. He called them mongrels. He called them near whites sometimes. He said they were striving to pass, and he made a list. This is a real document. It's called Surnames by Counties and Cities of Mixed Negroid Virginia Families Striving to Pass as Indian or White. The state of Virginia started reclassifying these people as colored. Not Native American, colored. The onus is on you to prove that you're white. Which is, and I cannot stress this enough, that is impossible. It was impossible to prove this. Suddenly these families had a big problem because the law said 1 drop of non-white blood makes you not white. So are the Randolphs not white now? Are Virginia's most powerful families about to be barred from marrying other white people? Are their kids going to be kicked out of the good schools? Are they going to be buried in colored cemeteries? No, of course not. That's why the Pocahontas exception exists. People want to say in the comments all the time, you Americans, you're obsessed with race. Why are you so obsessed? Dude, we're not obsessed with race. This is written into our history, and then it wasn't taught. I'm so serious about this. It's a hit list of family names. Oh, why are you guys so obsessed with race? Look at this freaking document. Hi, I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel where we talk about American identity and family stories. And before we jump back into this video, if you'd like to join me over at Patreon, get off of YouTube, we can direct message, we can chat. It's patreon.com/NYTN, or you could send me a coffee at coffee.com/NYTN13. Are you white? Legally white? Are you legally white? In 1924, the state of Virginia decided to settle this question once and for all because it is not a simple question and not a simple answer legally with a new law. And the law said if you had even 1 drop of Black blood, and we're talking 1 ancestor, at least 5 generations back, you were Black. Period. End of story. Unless you can prove that you were related to Pocahontas. Yes, the Pocahontas. Then you're fine. You're white. Carry on. I'm serious. Virginia wrote this exception into their racial purity law specifically for people who could trace their bloodline to a 12-year-old Powhatan girl from the 1600s. This is going to get real wild. It's going to get real wild. So before we keep going, let me know where you are watching this from. I'd love to know what state you're from or what country you're from and how many people we have from Virginia in particular, or maybe if you have Virginian ancestry. So this wasn't just a weird footnote that nobody was paying attention to. You know, sometimes laws get put into place and like they're just packed into other stuff and nobody knows. No, 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 no. This exception destroyed families, but it also saved some families. It created an entire underground industry of genealogists who would, for the right price, discover that, yes, you definitely had the Pocahontas connection. Don't worry about it. And this also meant that in Virginia, your legal race could change overnight based on which story your family could prove. Today, we're going to talk about the Pocahontas exception, how it worked, who it protected, who it destroyed, and how DNA testing 80 years later, you know what happens if people start taking these tests, revealed that most of the people who used it were lying the whole time. Let's get into it. So, November 14th, 1924, small town in Virginia, Rockbridge County, up in the Shenandoah Valley, really pretty area. I've been to this area before. Mountains, farms, just like small town vibes, so nice. So a woman named Atha Sorrels walks into the county clerk's office. She's there to get a marriage license. She wants to marry a man named Robert Painter. Maybe they grew up together, maybe their families knew each other. It's like a 5-minute process. You fill out the form, you pay the fee, boom, you're done. So the clerk's name is A.T. Shields. Shields looks at Atha's application, then he looks at her, then he looks back at the application. He's like, no. Not like come back tomorrow or like I'm about to go to lunch. Just no, no. So Atha thinks there's been a mistake. Maybe she filled out the form wrong. Maybe she missed something. So she's looking it over and she's like, well, what's wrong? What did I miss? And A.T. Shields, the county clerk, tells her he has, quote, reason to believe that she's not of a pure white race. Like, let's let that sink in. This random county bureaucrat, this random clerk, decided based on something that Atha Sorrels was not white enough to marry a white man. So we don't know what that something was. Maybe someone in town gossiped about her family. Maybe there was a rumor that was floating around. You saw the last name. Or maybe Shields just did not like her appearance. Okay, maybe she got a little too much sun that day. The law did not require the clerk to explain that feeling. He didn't need evidence, actually. He didn't need to hold a hearing. He was just able to just say, no, denied. And if A.T. Shields could decide that you weren't pure white, your marriage to a white person would be illegal. I've covered this on my channel a lot last year. There's a ton of videos about this whole time in the United States. Not that long ago, only 101 years. Now, if A.T. Shields decided that you weren't white, then if you married a white person, not only was it illegal, it was felony illegal. You go to prison. So Atha's sitting there in this office, thought she's like bride-to-be, can't wait to get married, probably now in complete shock. And Shields slides a piece of paper across the desk to her, okay? He says, you can appeal this. You can take me to court. She has 30 days. So Atha Sorrels hired a lawyer and she sued the county clerk. I have the actual petition to show you, and I can leave a link to it. Atha Sorrels versus A.T. Shields, clerk petition for mandamus, November 14th, 1924. So she's taking the small town government employee to court for just the right to get married. The right to get married. And to understand why this is happening, why she had to prove her racial purity to a county clerk, we have to talk about the laws that made this possible. So quick context. So I've done deep dives on Virginia's 1924 Racial Integrity Act before. I did them a year ago. I can link to those videos if you want that. But this is what you need to know right now for this story. Virginia's law said you couldn't marry a white person if you had any trace whatsoever, this is without a DNA test, of non-Caucasian blood. Not a significant amount, not a noticeable percentage, just any. So if you have one ancestor that goes back 6 generations, that is enough. That's the one drop, right? The clerk did not need to prove this, though. You had to prove that you didn't have it. Okay, the onus is on you to prove that you're white. Which is, and I cannot stress this enough, that is impossible. It was impossible to prove this. You are asking someone to document every single ancestor going back 200, 300 years without the internet, maybe without even a means to travel across to the next town, to their library, their records, no DNA tests, right? No internet forums, no hopping on Facebook to message someone. And you're going to prove that not one of your ancestors had a single drop of non-white blood. Think about this too. Like, there were so many times where libraries would be burned to the ground, courthouses get flooded, people didn't keep perfect genealogies, right? What are you supposed to do, right? This is an impossible situation. But that was your burden of proof. You had to prove a negative across centuries of history, or you couldn't get married. Unless you qualified for the exception. There's always an exception, right? This case goes before Judge Henry W. Holt, Circuit Court of Rockbridge County, Virginia. Judge Holt, from what I can tell, is from he's a fairly typical Virginia judge in 1924, which means he's probably not going to be our hero here. And sure enough, he starts his ruling like this. Quote, I am in cordial sympathy with the general purpose of the statute. Whether it be based upon pride, prejudice, or instinct, we look upon ourselves as a sceptered race and stand for its preservation and all its integrity. Okay, racist, obviously, 1924 Virginia, like, we're not shocked. But then he writes, but the statute in judgment goes far beyond anything that has heretofore been enacted. So translation here, he's like, actually, this law is insane even by our own standards. Then Judge Holt does something I genuinely did not expect when I was reading this document. He explains in detail why this law is unenforceable nonsense. So this is a direct quote. I could put this on here for you guys. I'll link to it. He said, quote, in 25 generations, so 25 generations of ancestors. So for you to your parents, that's one generation. So we're going really far back. One has 32 millions of grandfathers, not to speak of grandmothers, assuming there's no intermarriage. Half of the men who fought at Hastings were my grandfathers, he says. Some of them were probably hanged and some knighted. Who can tell? Certainly in some instances, there was an alien strain. I think he means like foreign strain. Beyond peradventure, I cannot prove that there was not. So here the judge is doing math. Okay, he's like, okay, there's like millions of ancestors going back this far. So if you go back 25 generations, you have a bazillion ancestors. And he's saying, I, Judge Henry W. Holt, sitting judge in Virginia, cannot prove that all of these ancestors were racially pure. Nobody can prove that. And then he writes this document. Quote, Alice never got herself into a deeper tangle. So he's comparing Virginia's racial law to Alice in Wonderland. A sitting judge in 1924 just called the state's flagship racial purity law. Crazy, upside down world. But there's more. He doesn't strike down the law. He can't because he's a circuit court judge. He's not the Supreme Court. He doesn't have that authority. But what he does do is he points out an exception. The law says you can't have any trace of non-Caucasian blood except, and this is the text of the law, except if you have 1/16 or less the blood of American Indians. So Judge Holt looks at Atha's evidence. She brought 130 years of family records. I don't know how this woman did it. Birth certificates, marriage license, family Bibles, whatever she brought, buried in there. And she says, actually, there is a small amount of Native American ancestry, but it's under 1/16. So she qualifies for the exception. Judge Holt writes, quote, the license should issue. She wins. She gets to marry Robert Painter. But here's what Judge Holt doesn't say in his ruling. Here's what he's not mentioning. Who is that exception really for? We have to rewind 300 years. 1607, Jamestown, Virginia, first permanent English settlement in North America. You know the story, right? Or at least the Disney version, that's wrong. John Smith, Pocahontas, Colors of the Wind, like that whole thing. I always loved that movie as a kid, at least the beginning part. The second part scared me. But the real story is actually way darker, way more complicated, way less musical. But that's not what we're here for today. What we're here for is what happened after that. So in 1614, Pocahontas, whose real name was Matoka, by the way, people pronounce that differently, converted to Christianity. She took the name Rebecca, and she married an English tobacco planter named John Rolfe, not John Smith. I know it's very sad if you've only watched the Disney movie. It's John Rolfe. They had a son named Thomas Rolfe. Thomas survived into adulthood. He had kids whose kids had kids. Here we go. By the 1800s, some of the wealthiest and most powerful families in Virginia were claiming to be descended from Pocahontas and John Rolfe. The Randolphs, the Bowlings, the Branches, the Lewises, these were the first families of Virginia. Old money, political power. These people ran the state. Every state has these families, right? And for 200 years, being descended from Pocahontas was a flex. This was exotic, it was romantic, it proved your family had been in Virginia since literally the beginning, right? So now you have a claim to this land. A claim, I'm putting in air quotes. It showed you had that frontier spirit. You're connected to the land, like you belong here. But then, March 1924, Virginia passes the Racial Integrity Act. Suddenly, these families had a big problem because the law said 1 drop of non-white blood makes you not white. And these families had been bragging about having Native American blood for 2 centuries. So are the Randolphs not white now? Are Virginia's most powerful families about to be barred from marrying other white people? Are their kids going to be kicked out of the good schools? Are they going to be buried in colored cemeteries? No, of course not. That's why the Pocahontas exception exists. The law was written with a specific carve-out. If you had 1/16 or less Native American blood, 1/16 is not a lot. This was called the Pocahontas Clause. And yes, so this is what people literally called it. It was designed to protect these families, but it gets twisted, believe it or not. So because the first families of Virginia were having genealogists document their Pocahontas connection, and you better believe they had genealogists on the retainer, right? There were still Native American communities living in Virginia at the time. I'm not going to be able, I never say the names right, so please correct me. But the Monacan people, the Pamunkey, the Chickahominy, the Mattapony, these people, documented tribal ancestry, people whose family have been in Virginia for thousands of years, not 300, thousands, right? The state of Virginia started reclassifying these people as colored, not Native American, colored, like black. Same or more Native blood, now classified as a completely different legal race. People want to say in the comments all the time, you Americans, you're obsessed with race. Why are you so obsessed? Dude, we're not obsessed with race. This is written into our history, and then it wasn't taught. And so a lot of us, including me, we are kind of shining a light on stuff that's been hidden for 2 generations, 3 generations, and we're shocked, but not really, right? Now, why would these people be colored, not considered Native American? Well, because of one man, Walter Pleeker. We did a video on him, actually a lot. So I'm not going to get too deep into it, but Walter Pleeker ran Virginia's Bureau of Vital Statistics from 1912 to 1946, so right during this time, and he was in charge of every birth certificate. He was overseeing it. Death certificate, marriage license, like he's doing all that stuff. And he had a theory. He believed that the Native American tribes in Virginia had intermarried with black people generations ago. For anyone who claimed to have Native American ancestry, he said, was actually mixed race black trying to pass as Indian to get around segregation laws. This was his theory. He called them mongrels. He called them near whites sometimes. He said they were striving to pass, and he made a list. So this is a real document that I've shared a bunch of times. It's called Surnames by Counties and Cities of Mixed Negroid Virginia Families Striving to Pass as Indian or White. I'm so serious about this. It's a hit list of family names. Oh, why are you guys so obsessed with race? Look at this freaking document. This is a real document. Now, maybe your family history was very different than mine, but my family at this time did fit in this list. They did fit in this list. And a lot of our history, a lot of our stories, even our last names were changed, lied about, not passed down to me. And I'm now, as a mother, trying to piece together as much as I can about my family story because of stuff like this. So like this has real world impact. And even if it didn't impact anyone who's alive today, do we just not study history because it doesn't impact the guy sitting next to me on the bus? Like, that would be ludicrous. But like, how much more should we study it if it's impacting the guy who's sitting next to me on the bus, right? So Pleeker sent copies of this list to every county clerk, every school registrar, every hospital, every draft board in Virginia. So if your last name was on this list, your native ancestry claim was not only rejected, your birth certificate was now changed from Indian to colored. And I know I'm going to get in trouble for this. If you've been on my channel for more than a year, you know that I've had demonetized videos, flagged videos from YouTube. Those are two different things. Also banned videos for using the word colored, because my great uncle, my Uncle Danny, who I've interviewed on here, his birth certificate says colored, and other family members too, and I've shared those documents on here, and you're not allowed to use that word. Apparently it is as bad as the F word, according to YouTube. I'm for real. And, it just really burns me because I see such trash on YouTube. I see literally pornographic material sent to people. People are using that. Actually just absolute trash. And I'm just like, here's a document from my family that says colored. And YouTube's like, nah, nah. And you can see here, like, not a lot has changed. So if your name was on this list, if your last name was on this list, you're roasted. Like, your marriage could be annulled. Your kids could be removed from their schools. You couldn't be treated at white hospitals. Like this, I did a video on the guy who was the head of the NAACP and the story of his father. He had been hit by a car and he had to be brought further away to a non-white hospital where he then passed away because he was not able to be treated at this other hospital. I mean, this is all serious, serious consequences. So I want to be absolutely clear about what's happening here first. Wealthy white families claiming Pocahontas ancestry were accepted as white. But actual Native Americans who had documented tribal connections and community ties were rejected and reclassified as black or colored. Possibly the same amount of Native blood, more Native blood, but completely different outcomes. So the Pocahontas exception was not protecting Native heritage. It was protecting specific families. And if you couldn't afford a genealogist to fight Walter Pleeker, if you didn't have the documents, you were cooked. There's nothing you could do. So what do you do when your entire life, maybe your marriage, your kids' education, your job, where you can live, where you can be buried, depends on having the right kind of ancestry? You get creative. So between 1924 and 1967, I just have to pause there. My mom was born 1961. Okay, again, this is recent. A whole industry sprang up around the Racial Integrity Act. So genealogists who specialized in finding, or let's be honest, creating family trees that would satisfy Walter Pleeker and his clerks. So now we're manipulating documents. Now, some of this was legitimate research. People would dig through courthouse records for you, go through the old family Bibles, letters, wills, trying to figure it out, but some of it was less legitimate. And so a lot of these genealogical records, though, from the 1600s, 1700s are kind of a mess because the British burned Richmond during the Revolutionary War, so records are gone. Then the Civil War happens, more records are gone. And sometimes the records that survived were just like not that great or they're flat out wrong, right? Because census takers in the 1800s would just guess. They look at you and they're like, okay, you're mulatto here, you're white here, you're Indian here, you're black here. This has happened in my family over and over and over again. Like, not even a question. My great-grandmother was born in Louisiana, 1900. Her census, when she was 10, she was mulatto, but her parents were both censused as black 10 years before she was born, and then later censused as white. And parts of that family have also been censused as colored or Indian. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, right? So which one's true? Well, whichever one the government needs to be true, right? The Pocahontas bloodline was already a mess. So you couldn't even say, well, I'm gonna take this exception. Because Thomas Rolfe, the son of Pocahontas and John Rolfe, had one daughter, Jane Rolfe. Jane married Robert Bowling. They had one son, John Bowling. Then he had 6 kids. That's it. 6 kids. I say that's it. 6 kids. That's a lot now, but it wasn't back then. But from those 6 kids, by the 1920s, there were hundreds of families descend from Pocahontas. That's a lot of people claiming a very narrow bloodline. And were they all telling the truth? Probably not, right? But who can check? How do we check this? Walter Pleeker was too busy harassing all of the other families to audit every first family's genealogy. I say first family, the big important Virginia families. This is where the law becomes truly perverse, because the Pocahontas exception was supposed to be about blood quantum, remember 1/16th, about biology and percentages, which, like, how do you figure that out? But in practice, it was just about paperwork. I've said this a bazillion times on my channel. American identity is paperwork. It's bureaucratic. That's what it is. And so if you had the right documents or you could create them, you were now white. The end, right? But if you didn't have them, you weren't. It's like so bizarre. It's so bizarre to me. So Ava Sorrels won her case because she did come up with 130 years of documentation and she could afford a lawyer, and most people couldn't do that. So some families had to make impossible choices. Maybe you moved to other states where the laws were different. My family certainly did that a bunch, or less enforced, or you changed your names. My family did that too. Some families cut ties with relatives who couldn't pass. Sadly, mine also did that. Just stopped talking to them. Pretended they didn't exist, started a new life, disappeared into whiteness, and never looked back. Literally, that is the reason I started this channel, looking for my family story. Finding Lola is my docu-series. It's a 4-part series, but I've also put a new version up that's just all 4 parts together. It's like an hour long. Going to Louisiana, trying to find my great-grandma Lola's story and who we really were. Some families disappeared into whiteness and never looked back. But some families did the opposite. They gave up trying to prove that they were white or Native American, and they disappeared into blackness because then at least they could stay together. This law stayed into effect till 1967. That's when Loving versus Virginia, I'm sure you know this court case, the Supreme Court case that legalized interracial marriage, finally struck down the Racial Integrity Act. But it did not end this. It did not end this. The damage had been done. Some families have been split for generations. Communities have been destroyed. People died not even knowing their family story. But then there's always more. In 2000, something happened that revealed just how absurd this whole thing had been. DNA testing. So in the early 2000s, genetic genealogy became accessible to the public. You could send in a cheek swab or spit in a vial, pay $100, and find out where your ancestors supposedly came from. And the researchers started testing people who claimed to descend from Pocahontas. The results, most of them did not have it. The bowling line, that narrow, well-documented line from Pocahontas and her great-grandchildren, turned out to be way less widespread than people had thought. So some families who had been rejected by Walter Pleeker, who said they were lying about their Native heritage, who were reclassified as Black, turned out to be telling the truth. So by the time that the DNA testing came around, it was too late. So families had been separated, right? Communities are scattered. Maybe people lived out their whole life on the wrong side of a color line that was drawn based on paperwork that turned out to be false. Virginia did not apologize for the Racial Integrity Act until 2001. I was in high school when they apologized. Yeah, I'm not old. I'm turning 40 in a couple months. 2001. That's like 24 years ago, 25 years ago. Like, what? So some of the people who reclassified under that law are alive now. Their kids are alive. Their grandkids are growing up right now, like me here, dealing with family trees that do not make sense because someone 3 generations ago got kicked out or got ties cut just to survive. And the Pocahontas exception was not about protecting Native ancestry or heritage. It wasn't even about biology. It was about protecting people in power. Guess what? That's every law. Like, I am so politically done. Like, I do not trust anyone at this point. And I don't know how we could have in the first place. Just look at our history from just a little while ago. If you are wealthy and connected, you can claim Pocahontas and stay white, even if you didn't have the ancestry. It's not even about being white that's so important. It's that everything that came with that, right? The freedom to just choose your own adventure. But if you were poor and had no connections, your actual documented, maybe DNA now DNA confirmed ancestry, how'd you be classified as Black or colored? Same blood, different story, different life. This was a sorting mechanism, a way to decide who got to keep their power and who got pushed out. And that's why I say in this channel a lot, I really don't think that this is a left-right issue. I don't think it's like a Democrat-Republican issue. This is not even a black-white issue, I'm going to tell you that. This is about the people who have all of the power and the money, very few of them, and the rest of us. Like, there's so much infighting going on right now, and we should be sticking together because they don't want us to see that dichotomy. All the primary documents I showed you today are linked in the description, and if I forgot to list it, please let me know. But this is public record. This is history. I guarantee you it's not in your history books. If you want to go deeper on the Racial Integrity Act and see some of the work I've done using primary sources on that, I got full videos on it. I'll leave that playlist at the end. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, we'll talk soon.
The term Findian's been around for a long time. Parents immigrated from Finland, and then my mother was full-blooded Ojibwe.
Ojibwe and Finnish, there's so many similarities, so many cultural similarities that there are things that we didn't even have to really talk about.
That was a time when Ojibwe people were not welcome, and Finns were not necessarily welcome either.
Hi, my name is Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel, where we talk about American identity and family stories. And right now, I want to touch on a topic that I looked at a few months ago. I was looking at the Finnish immigrant experience here to the US. And one of the reasons I was so interested in it is because I came across a court case for a man named John Svan, and his cadre of friends and family actually were included in this court case. And they were trying to become US citizens. Now, I've touched on this a lot. The Naturalization Act here in the United States said you had to be a free white person of good character or of African descent, and we're talking after 1870, to become a US citizen. And there was some dispute whether or not the Finns counted as white. And over the course of the court case, you could see these arguments being made, Mongolian or mongrel heritage. And it's so fascinating. So I will leave a link to that video below. In the course of studying for that video, I came across a phrase that was brand new to me. It was the term Findian. Now that is interesting and specific. So I started researching this term, and this term, I've seen some people respond to my community post and thinking it has to do with being a pretend Indian. It does not. So we are going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about who are the Findians. Before we do that, make sure that you subscribe and like and get connected with me through my newsletter, or if you want an ad-free experience, you can join over at Patreon. It's $3 a month. I am slowly shifting my YouTube library over there as well, and I put videos out there first, ad-free, and we can connect, and it's awesome. Before I tell you some of the history that I researched, I would love some of these folks to speak for themselves. There is a man, he's a doctor, and he actually has spoken on his unique Finnish, I think it's Ojibwe heritage, and he's from Minnesota, and he's been featured in a lot of things. I reached out to him, and I asked him, would you be interested in talking with me for the channel? That was only 3 or 4 days ago, so I haven't heard back yet, so fingers crossed. But I wanted to share a clip from a trailer that he was in where he talks a little bit about his ancestry. So let's hop over there and watch that, and then we're gonna come back and talk all about who are the Findians. And thank you, someone actually suggested to watch this trailer in this documentary, and it was incredible. So thank you so much for, I think it was a couple of you, so thank you so much for the folks who suggested that.
Parents immigrated from Finland in 1903 and 1908, I think. And then my mother was full-blooded Ojibwe.
My dad is Native American and Finn, and my mom is Native American and Polish.
The term Findian's been around for a long time.
My family is both Finnish American and Native American. So my dad's family, the Yakula, they homesteaded here in the middle of the reservation in the early 1900s.
Our word for a Finlander is Maduditswinini, and they're the people of the sweat lodge.
Ojibwe and Finnish, there's so many similarities, so many cultural similarities that there are things that we didn't even have to really talk about. That was just kind of understood.
They come from the that same birch bark band that runs across the top of the globe, and the same kind of country and the same kind of topography, and they have a lot of the same the same qualities, and so it was natural that they would gravitate towards each other.
So I wasn't sure if Findian was something that was just made up or if it was something that the community of people actually recognized, and it sounded like this is a term that's been around for a long time. There was a quote that I found there was a project from 1974,
and it was from the University of Minnesota, I believe, Duluth. And it was recollections of a Native American man. I think it was in the 70s. And he talks a lot about the interaction between Native and Finnish culture. I want to read some quotes that he said. He said, quote, "Years ago, it wasn't long before the Finns and Indians began to marry. You have to be careful what you say now. A guy may be partly Finn, partly a white person, and look like a Finn, but he's an Indian all right. He's on the reservation enrollment. Be careful when you're talking about the Indian, because if he doesn't like that, you're going to be caught outside." Just this sense of there's this intermingling happening to this point. I mean, you need to be careful what you say, because you actually don't know who you might offend if someone doesn't look the part that you expect them to look. Now, another quote that I came across, which is super interesting. The first Finnish immigrants in America moved to the present Delaware area in the early 17th century, and local Indians began to call them, quote, "sweat lodge men," or white men who are like us, because the Finns went to the sauna. And because of this, the Finns came along well with the Indians, and during the first Indian Wars, the Finnish dwellings were left intact. So there is this sense of camaraderie between these two groups. I wanted to delve into that a little bit. And of course, I would so much rather have some folks who are actually part of these communities talk on it. But until that happens, I want to just share some of the stuff I found with you. There's a couple reasons why the Finns and indigenous Native Americans would be getting along right out of the gates. And the first is the possibility a lot of the Finns were of Sami heritage. So some of the Finnish Americans coming over, or some of the Finnish immigrants to America, were actually Sami. And these were indigenous people, a semi-nomadic reindeer herding group. I read a really good book about them when I was in college. I was studying Russia, but it was a book that we read, and I wish I could remember the name of it. It was so good. But it had such a deep connection to the land. And so then they're immigrating over to the United States, and they're encountering other indigenous people. And there's a lot of similarity in the way that they lived their life, including the sauna. The second is this concept of every man's rights. This is a principle that seems to be really deeply ingrained in the Finnish culture. And this resonated with the Native American approach to land, this mutual respect for land and shared rights, just this environment where even if the Finns owned the land, they allowed the Native Americans to come and be on it, or pick berries, or hunt, or continue to live off the land. So there wasn't this segmented, fenced-in feeling of like, this is mine now, and you can't cross this boundary. It was much more communal feeling. Now, another reason why they may have struck a chord and stuck together was that there was a lot of shared prejudice that they both experienced.
The dad side of the family, the Vainio name,
Yes,
is the Finnish side of the family. And I just hear so many sort of similar backgrounds to mine, with that side of the family being immigrants, right? And needing to survive on the land, and the sauna being built first. Was there more of sort of that side of the family that you grew up with, other than just the sauna and grandmother's bread, of that immigrant experience up the shore?
when my grandfather came from Jala, Finland in 1903, and my grandmother came from Porti, Finland in 1908, I think. And she was a servant, a maid in New York City for a couple of years. And my grandfather put an ad in a paper that she read for a housekeeper up in Sturgeon, Minnesota. And she answered that ad, and they ended up getting married.
What are some stories from the Ojibwe side of the family, the Anishinaabe side of the family?
So that's a lot of poverty. The boarding schools were designed to kill the Indian and save the man, in quotes, and they did a pretty good job of that. My grandfather was taken away from his family and put in boarding school when he was young. My Uncle George Earth was taken from his family and put in boarding school when he was young, and both of them are long gone. George Earth introduced my mother, my Ojibwe mother, to my dad. My dad owned the Good Luck Tavern in Sturgeon, Minnesota, and he treated George and George's mom and dad well, and had a bar, and George used to go and drink there, him and his mom and his dad. And that was a time when Ojibwe people were not welcome, and Finns were not necessarily welcome either. There used to be signs up in Virginia, I was told, that said no Finns, no Indians, no dogs. And George was always so proud that my dad would let them come in the bar and serve them like regular people. And my grandparents, my Finnish grandparents, would welcome George and his mom and dad into the house. And he's like, and that was just, it just floored him that they would be so giving.
And I talked about the prejudice against Finnish immigrants in my other video. But like I said, there were signs that said no Finns and no Indians allowed. And these were stark reminders of the status of being an outsider. And when you have two outsiders together, a lot of times they create their own thing. And so the shared experience of marginalization probably deepened these connections between these two cultures. They were called the sweatbath men by a lot of Native Americans. It was like an affectionate term. It seemed like it was a really affectionate term. They were the sweatbath men, or the men who were like us, which that's significant. That is such a significant name to be giving a group of immigrants who are just landing on the shores of the United States. So the name Findian is a portmanteau. It's like breakfast and lunch becomes brunch. It's Finn and Indian becomes Findian. And I think it's just a really unique experience, a unique story. And I don't think that this is a heritage that a lot of people have. Like a lot of American citizens have Italian heritage, or they have Irish heritage. Not many probably have this unique blend of cultures. Now, Liz Yacola, who spoke on here, she's a member of the Fond du Lac band of the Lake Superior Chippewa, and she has Finnish heritage. And she said, quote, "When the Finns arrived in Minnesota in the late 1800s, they came at a time when the Anishinaabe were just put onto the reservations. And so this timing, coupled with the shared affinity for nature and storytelling and communal living, probably laid the groundwork for this really unique cultural convergence. The Finnish sauna and the Native American sweat lodge, which were symbols for these people of purification and renewal, became like emblematic. And that's why, you have the Finns being called the men of the sweat bath, or the people like us. It was being used interchangeably. And when I was mentioning that article, or it was really a project from the 1970s, it's teaching from Paul Buffalo from the University of Minnesota Duluth. I want to read another quote from it. He said, "The sauna is something that the Finns brought into the country, but the Indian knew it before as a sweat bath. The Indians always had a sweat lodge before the Finns came. And before the Finns came, we called it a sweat bath, but we called it a Finn bath later on. Finns, Norwegians, Swedes, and everybody went to the sauna. We knew that, but we still called it a Finn bath at that time. The others got it from the Finns, and the Finns know how to do it." I just love the transition from saying sweat bath to Finn bath, because it really reflects this blend of cultures, this new shared identity. And I think we see that sometimes in not even our family stories, but just the American story, how names change, things are blended, not just genetically, but the names of places, the names of foods, the way we do things. That for most of these things that we are doing and tasting and hearing and experiencing here in the United States, it has not been untouched for hundreds of years. It has been influenced by so many different cultures. And that's a beautiful thing. I plan on touching on this a little bit more in the future. Let me know what you think. And there was a girl who was raised Anishinaabe in Minnesota, but she also had Swedish heritage. And she was picked to go to Sweden to be on a Swedish TV show. To reconnect to her Swedish heritage. She got on, and I watched part of the episode, so I don't know if that'd be something you'd be interested in watching with me, and we can talk about it. It was so interesting, because I think sometimes we see things as almost a one-way street, where people with non-Indigenous heritage are trying to reconnect to that Indigenous heritage, and here it was the inverse. You have this woman who sees herself as a white Indigenous woman, is what she says, but she was disconnected from her dad's Swedish side, and she's trying to go on that journey of reconnecting, and that brings her over to Sweden. And so I just think it's absolutely fascinating to see that path of discovery. I really hope that Dr. Arnie sees that email and says that he'll come talk with us, because I think that would be just absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for being here, and we will talk soon.
Is a Lumbee. You know, we refer to ourselves as Lums.
He had his preconceived notion when he came to Robertson County. And finally, I just got tired of it. And I told him, I said, look, we know who we are. You know, we know. We have always known. Y'all are the ones who are trying to identify something. This Heather Locklear thing, Heather Locklear ain't no Lum. I don't care what nobody says. I don't care if her granddaddy or great-granddaddy or what it was came from here. She's never lived as a Lum.
I want to play this one part where there's a student talking about who does he see are Lumbee, who counts. I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel, where we talk about American identity and family stories. And I'm so excited to bring my first video about the Lumbee. And I'm not really sure how I found out about the Lumbee tribe, but when I started uploading my DNA to GEDmatch, because that's like kind of the graduation ceremony after taking a DNA test, is taking the raw DNA and putting it on GEDmatch, I was able to connect with a lot of folks in both the Melungeon community and the Lumbee community and have connections with my DNA, matching with them. And I don't know how much we'll get into on this video about the overlap between those two communities, but it just kind of sparked my interest. And I was like, well, who are the Lumbee? I'm definitely far enough removed that I don't have any cultural ties to them. I don't know exactly even how I'm connected to them, but it was cool to see that genetic link there. So imagine being a part of a community that has existed for centuries, yet constantly having to prove your identity to a society who refuses to see. That's the story of a lot of small groups, and not so small groups here in the United States, but this is the reality for the Lumbee Indians of North Carolina. Wendy Moore Ledwell, a Lumbee Indian, poignantly expressed the struggle, and she said, quote, "In the decades past, I have yearned for your acceptance, neither red nor white willing to give. Yet I know within my being of my significance to this land. Abandoned, I must cling to my self-recognition as my salvation." And what is it about the Lumbee's story that has led a century-long battle for recognition? So the Lumbee tribe comprised, at least what I saw, about 40,000 members at this point, traces its roots back to the mysterious lost colony of Sir Walter Raleigh and several Native American tribes. They have a profound historical lineage going back to the very beginning of this nation, before this nation was America. But they face significant discrimination due to, in part, their physical appearances, which many perceive as not fitting with the traditional image of what a Native American is. Which, just as an aside, is super bizarre to me, because when we're talking about indigenous people, I mean, there's indigenous people on every continent, right? But let's just talk about the Americas for now. So let's think about indigenous people who are at the highest, most northern point of Canada, and indigenous people who are down deep in Mexico. Are they going to look identical? No, of course not. Like there's diversity even in diversity, right? But why does the appearance hold so much power over their recognition? And how has that perception shaped their journey for federal acknowledgement? So for over 100 years, the Lumbee have sought federal recognition, only to be met with a lot of different reasons for denial. Part of it is their origins, their physical features, and their lack of traditional reservation have all been used against them. But in 1956, Congress reorganized the tribe, but didn't fully acknowledge them, citing their perceived lack of, quote, Indianness, this mysterious thing of like, can't quite put our finger on it. So this partial recognition placed the Lumbee in purgatory, a perpetual state of limbo, caught in between being recognized in name by the federal government, but not in substance. So let's talk about the concept of Indianness. I have done a couple videos with friends and family members and distant cousins about this concept of who counts as Native American. What does that mean? The concept of Indianness there's a spectrum there. We have the cultural, spiritual, heritage, communal values, and then legal definitions. What does this mean to the United States of America legally, nation to nation? And I want to bring in some voices from the Lumbee Nation I found from some older documentaries and let them speak for themselves. It's called Indian by Birth, the Lumbee Dialect, and it's old. I'll have to check. I think it came out in like the 80s. You can kind of tell by the way it looks once we get started.
Formally recognized by the state of North Carolina, the Lumbee tribe has yet to receive full recognition from the United States government. The cloudy history of Robeson County raises many questions about the influences that contributed to Lumbee culture, although these questions are typically of more concern to outside scholars than to the Indians of Robeson County themselves.
We had a long conversation, and we were talking and talking. I thought the guy was pretty cool, you know. I was giving him credit for being an intellect there for a few minutes till he turned out to be an idiot, you know. And he was like, going to insist, no matter what I would say, he was trying to, you know, paraphrase it into what he wanted to say. He had his preconceived notion when he came to Robeson County. And finally, I just got tired of it. And I told him, I said, look, we know who we are. You know, we know. We have always known. Y'all are the ones who are trying to identify something.
Americans in general have a stereotype of Lumbees, as they do of Native Americans. And Americans generally expect Native Americans all to look the same way and to act the same way like we do with all other human beings, human groups. And it just doesn't hold up. None of the categories will work. If there were a surviving whole traditional language here, it would be an easier case to make, especially to other Native groups who do have surviving traditional languages. It would be an easier case to make for Lumbees being recognized fully by the federal government.
Well, the Lumbees have lost whatever tribal language they once had, but I still think that we have an identifying way of speaking that makes us different from any other group in the area.
Like an omen of something bad that's going to happen, or a sign of death. You can see a totem or you can hear a totem.
Yeah, Juvember. What's that? Yeah, that's when you have a cold snap in July. That's Juvember.
Mommy? Not familiar with that.
Mommy can try to act like their mama.
Now, people around here, you know, non-Indians around here, you know, they're used to it. They're part of, their ancestors are part of the reason our ancestors thought the way we did. But you get anywhere away from this immediate area, people, they know it's different. They know it's something they've never heard before, and a lot of times they're fascinated by it because it, you know, it's something different.
Little butter Brian, eating laid back down.
What do you got that?
Chicken and rice and chicken.
All right, and I want to play this one part where there's a student talking about who does he see are Lumbee, who counts as Lumbee. And I just wanna, I'll hop back a little bit here.
Lum is a Lumbee. You know, we refer to ourselves as Lums.
For me to be able to call somebody Lumbee, it'll be for having Lumbee blood in them, for having to be knowing about the culture, you know, they have to know about their ancestors, but for like people outside where they know nothing about their culture. I mean, they call everybody Lumbee. There is Lumbee. They got blood. Yeah. They know nothing about their culture. That's not their culture. Me, really, I can't. I mean, they are Native American, but for me, I really can't consider them Native American if they with them to learn about the culture.
If you maintain your community ties and stuff, if it's just coming home at Christmas and from Mother's Day and Lumbee homecoming and stuff like that, it's got to be some kind of way. I mean, you know, this Heather Locklear thing, Heather Locklear ain't no Lum. I don't care what nobody says. I don't care if her granddaddy or great granddaddy or what it was came from here. She's never lived as a Lum. She's never been involved in this community. She's never certainly had to experience the things that are just going to be part of your life experience if you're alone, you know.
So I just thought this was super interesting because this is kind of what I think ends up happening is that there are multiple levels of identification in groups. We have on one level overarching Lumbee, looking to get that federal recognition that they've been fighting for over 100 years. But even kind of coming down past that, people saying, well, if you didn't grow up in the culture, if you only come home for Christmas, if you're not really connected, like he's using Heather Locklear. Locklear is a Lumbee last name. I think it's also a Melungeon last name. Two, she doesn't count because she hasn't lived this life. And this is where that tension comes in, because there are a lot of us who didn't grow up with the knowledge of their ancestry, didn't even know where their family came from. And some people don't care. I mean, I think if you don't care, you're probably not hanging with me on my channel. Like, I think if you're on here, you do care. And I mean, I do. And, I have gone to great lengths to reconnect with as much as I can possibly reconnect with in Louisiana and even in Italy, trying to do that. And it's not easy. I could see where he's coming from. I understand where he's coming from. There is this sense of like, you're in the community, you're an outsider to the community. But as someone who is most definitely an outsider in a lot of or all of my ancestry family communities, it is hard to hear, because there are so often, for so many people, they may not have had a choice, and maybe that's how it is for your family, where you didn't have a choice. And so that's where this stuff gets really muddy. And I want to continue to research the Lumbee, but I wanted to just bring this a little bit to you. And I usually try to keep my videos, like 10, 15 minutes, not too long. I know for me, like sometimes I'll see a video on YouTube I want to watch and it's like 2 hours long. I'm like, nah, like I just don't have 2 hours. So I'd love to break this up into bite-sized pieces. So let me know what angle on Lumbee we should cover next. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Do you have connections to this community? What do you think about what they're saying? Let me know what you think. I will leave a playlist for the other Redbone Melungeon videos I've done below, because I think they intersect in a lot of places. Otherwise, we'll talk soon.
Yatohi Hokisaku, Andrew Jolivette, Takapa Ishak, the Ishak. Andrew Jolivette. I'm a professor of ethnic studies at the University of California, San Diego, where I also chair the Department of Ethnic Studies and direct the Native American and Indigenous Studies program. Formerly, I was a professor and department chair of American Indian Studies at San Francisco State University. And I would like to acknowledge the Kumeyaay people of the San Diego territory, the unceded territory, as well as acknowledge the Ohlone people of the San Francisco Bay Area, where I was born and raised, and the Atakapa Ishak, the federally unrecognized, seeking state recognition tribe, which I'm a member of. Yeah.
And they're from Louisiana.
In Louisiana, yeah, Southwest
Yes.
Louisiana. From actually, pretty far reaching, generally from Southwest Louisiana into Southeast Texas.
So
although there are some folks even as far east as New Orleans, southeast, I guess we'd say, yeah.
Okay, so it's just interesting because I know you and I are both of like mixed Creole heritage. I saw, I was just looking through some of the stuff that you've done, that you have a lot of Guillory family. We took the DNA test. Surprise, 1 million Guillory cousins. I don't know where they connect to, so I'm sure we're family.
Hello, cousin, because yes, I always tell people there's certain names. It's almost all the families, but definitely the Guillories, all the folks descend from the same folks. And you know what's interesting about the Guillories, getting into the topic of Native ancestry, I found a lot of the Guillories actually are very much involved in Native organizing. So a cousin of ours, Bonnie Duran, she's a professor at the University of Washington. She's also Coushatta, Alabama Coushatta, as well. But she's been very active for like 30, almost 40 years in American Indian communities and public health research. Another cousin, he passed away, unfortunately, recently. Raphael Guillory, his sister, Venice Guillory, is a professor at San Jose State, but he was a professor for many years at Eastern Washington University. Their father's Creole Guillory, and their mother's Nez Perce. So, and there's others I think I've come across over the years, but yes. And then those Guillories, when they get their results back, they're like, oh my God, there's so much Native ancestry. They have some of the higher ones that I've seen from Creoles, actually, the Guillories, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was all very shocking to us because we were told we were French. My mom's grandmother left Natchitoches in the 30s and went to New York, and that's where I was born. And yeah, we were French. And then, I saw family pictures and I was like, okay,
There's
like,
something else going on here.
it's
There's
like,
something else. They look Latino. What's going on here,
yeah,
right?
well, then, the
Or
census
something.
records, and it's like, they're Mexican, they're Black, they're mulatto. And I'm like, okay, well, and here we go, right?
Have you read Bliss Boyard's book, The One Drop Rule on her father? I don't know if you know Bliss Boyard,
Yes.
but yes. So, because when you mentioned well, not Natchitoches, but New York, that connection made me think of her and some of her work and her own journey and finding some of this stuff out. She's been really great on this topic as well.
Amazing. Well, I think the shock for me is I thought my family was just really weird, right? We're weird in New York. People are always like, what are you? I'm like, I don't know. And then to find out this is a community experience of not knowing who you are. And that honestly, like even saying that, I get emotional because I didn't know other people understood that feeling of feeling like sometimes people would ask, are you this or that? I would just say yes, because I don't want to get into it. Or I didn't know. And I was really embarrassed that I didn't know. So for your own racial ethnic identity, like how has it evolved over time, if it has? And like, has the one drop rule and blood quantum, how has that impacted you? Or if it hasn't, like.
It's interesting because, so growing up mostly, so my father's Creole from Louisiana, and I would probably say what most folks might call white passing, which we can get into the whole idea of white passing or passing and what that means, because I have some issues with the term. But he and my mother's African American with some little bit of European, little bit of Native ancestry. He identified, when they moved in 1960 from Opelousas to San Francisco, my grandparents showed them a film, The Imitation of Life. Very famous film, right? About a mixed race girl and her mother who was African American, and the girl whose father's supposed to be this light-skinned guy, is refusing blackness, right? And this goes off, leaves her mother, abandons her, as you know. They showed them this film and they said, we're moving to San Francisco. If anyone asks, we're French Canadians. If you want to be Creole, be my guest. That's your opinion. My dad had a strong identification with being Black and Native, more so actually than with the white part, which is interesting because he was probably the lightest of all. He was born with a towhead, blonde hair, hazel eyes. And then his sisters all have darker hair and features, and you kind of see the mix there. And my uncle was also very light, or is very light. And so growing up for me, it was interesting because I'm actually the only one of like my dad's kids who have brown skin. I guess my two younger brothers who we have the same parents are much lighter than me. My mom and dad were both married before, so I have one of my brothers. His mom's half Mexican, half white. So he looks Latino, white, if you will, whatever looks means. And then my other brother, probably most people assume he's white. His mom's Irish mostly, and German. And I think she actually has a little bit of Choctaw too. But he's blonde, blue-eyed. And then my mom, who was married before to an African-American guy, my three older siblings are darker than I am. So it's a very kind of mixed family. I always tell people it's kind of like very much like Latin culture, right? And Creoles are a part of Latin culture. And so it's like, oh, if you know Celia Cruz, Ricky Martin, that's my family. We have every extreme and color variation, but it wasn't talked about. It was like a secret. I would go to my grandmother's house. We'd go every Sunday after Mass. I remember her talking about, this is actually the introduction to my book, Louisiana Creoles on Mixed Race Native Identity. Is called Who is White? It's a play off James Davis's book, Who is Black? And so it made me think, how do people figure out what does it mean to actually be white or European, or what does that even mean? And so for me, people always tried to tell me who I was. Oh, you're mulatto. Oh, you're biracial, or you're half Mexican and half Black. They didn't know. And so I feel like very early on there was some confusion, but I think the one drop rule definitely impacted my dad. His sisters, though, and my grandmother and my grandfather, with the exception of one sister, they all more or less, well, there's 5 siblings. 2 of them identified as white, married white men. Their kids, I don't think, knew. My other aunt married a Puerto Rican guy. Then she kind of identified more as mixed and blended into like Latin and Native culture because that's more where she fit. And then my uncle would always say he was biracial, and I was like, what happened to the Creole part? That's what always interested me, was that this cultural piece was missing. And so interestingly enough, I remember always my dad saying, well, yeah, we're also Native American, and talking to my grandmother about it. And she said, yeah, we're Blackleg. And I was like, Blackleg, where's that at? Or Blackfoot, right? And I'm like, where? Before the Louisiana Purchase? I'm like, why does every Black person say they're Blackfoot or Blackleg, right? However, years later, I would find out why and that she actually was right. So my uncle was friends with this anthropology professor at City College in San Francisco. And I was talking to her, and she said, well, you know, there's a tribe in Florida called the Blackleg. And the reason why is because of their swampy, brackish bayou waters, that their legs were very dark. Opelousas or Opelousas, where the tribe's from, it means Blackleg.
What? Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's
And
wild.
so I was like, oh, this is not just some fictive kind of story that's being passed down generation after generation. Stories of treaters. My great grandmother, my grandmother's mother, was a treater, a traiteur. She treated blood illnesses. You know, so I think that for me, I probably because of my dad, was not so much comfortable with my white side actually growing up. It was more, I was like, I'm Black and I'm Indian, and that was kind of it. And as I became an adult, right, and I think reconnecting with my brothers or other family, where I was like, well, wait a minute, we're much more than this. And so today I identify as Creole and multiracial or mixed race, and feel like, you know, we should be able to identify with all the different aspects of ourselves and not feel like folks should be controlling or telling other people who they get to be. Just like my aunts, if they wanted to identify as white, how is that passing if they're 60, 70% white or 80% white? If that's what they are, European descent, then that's their choice, right? I think it's beautiful for them to be able to also identify with their 5 or 8 or 10 or whatever it is percent Native, and their, you know, 15 or whatever percent it is, you know, African descent. Um, so that's kind of what I would say, sort of growing up, my experiences. And I've always tried to teach my students too, to like push back on what people tell you. Like, I have students who are Mexican ancestry who will say, oh, well, people don't think I'm Mexican because I have blonde hair and blue eyes. I'm like, go to Guadalajara, there's plenty of blonde hair. People don't get to tell you who you are, and that's one of the problems that still exists, is that people say, well, if you don't fit a bubble. I remember people saying Beyonce is not Creole, you know, and it was like, why? Her booty's too big. I literally, these are actually Creole people, I think, who were maybe saying this years ago in New Orleans at a conference the Creole Heritage Center put on. And or other people who would tell me, oh, she's not Black because her hair is not the right texture for her. So it's interesting, the cultural cues, the codes,
Yes,
right, that tell people. And then I've had the opposite experience, which I think is pretty awesome, where I'm like, you don't know what anybody is. Like, if we had met and somewhere, you know, and I say, oh, I would not be surprised at all that you tell me you have Creole ancestry, right? Because I'm looking, and you can have blonde hair and blue eyes, and I might still think that. It really just depends, and it's a very different. Louisiana is a particular beast when it comes to ethnic
it's
identity.
a special Louisiana thing, and I think the cues are interesting because you know, am putting myself out in the public, which I hate, but I do feel like it's kind of the baton that the ancestors have given me to do. I really feel like this is the thing I'm supposed to be doing. People want to comment about what they see, and I'll hear comments. But my hair is relaxed. I have my hair relaxed. I live in Nashville. I don't want to deal with the curls. And I know that, like, you look one way if you're this way or that way. And I think just how dangerous it is to make these assumptions based on what you see. But it's kind of awkward because one of these classifications is still codified into federal law, right? The blood quantum is a nation to nation thing. And the other one obviously was overturned, and especially in Louisiana, you know, 1983, one drop rules overturned.
Speaking of Guillory, right? Do you know the woman who sued, right, is our relative, Susie Guillory Phipps. So the 1982 case went to the Supreme Court, where she sued over her racial designation because she wanted to go travel, and her passport. And they said, no, your third great grandmother, who's Margarita Guillory, a very famous case. She's one of the first, like, Black descent women who sued for her own freedom and then bought the freedom of her children. But she descends from this person, and so it sparked this huge case over the one drop rule, which is interesting because I don't know if you know, like in Louisiana, the one drop rule was so intense that even up until the 1960s, 1980s, even apparently here, they kept a list in vital statistics of particular surnames that they would return the records. And that's what happened to her, essentially, is they returned her record. Now, the book I mentioned to you, Jack Forbes' book on Black and Native peoples, he was one of the first people, very smart, to catch this. It was a paper genocide, a bloodless genocide, right? One way to eradicate a people is to turn them into a completely different people or to say they don't exist. So one way that that's happened, right, is through racial mixing. And so mix them out, right? That was actually what the relocation program was all about. Federal relocation was really about moving Indians, Native people into urban areas where they would mix and blend in with other people so they would no longer, eventually they wouldn't exist, right? And so blood quantum is something that, yes, is codified into the law. I would say, though, that one drop is also, even as a social practice, still very much maintained. And so it's interesting how one is legal and one is now more social and sort of political and maybe cultural, you could say. But they both kind of function in terms of impact in the same way.
They do. Do you feel like I know what you will say, but I do think for the sake of just public facing conversation, are these classifications creating a loss of identity, or are they preserving identity? And I think in particular talking about Native Americans, because I don't know, it's split, it's split where people are, they don't like it, but they're going to do it anyway because they're afraid of what happens if they don't.
Well, there's a whole movement going on right now about Pretendianism, right? I'm sure you've maybe heard a bit about it. I've kind of gotten myself stuck in the middle of it quite a bit for speaking out. And it's interesting because even though people say, oh, well, no, we're not even talking about, there's hardly anyone on there that's Black descent, it's mostly white folks who are whatever. But I will still say it's the targeting has been very anti-Black. People don't believe in state recognized tribes. They don't believe in people that are reconnecting. They say, even the argument that I've heard where people say, you have an ancestor from 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever generations ago, that doesn't make you an Indian, right? But it makes you a Black person. Right. in Louisiana, right? And so the thing is that people don't understand also Indian identity in places like North Carolina with the Lumbee, where they've accused them of being an entirely fake tribe. My tribe that they're saying is, bogus. There's so many tribes, right? Non-federally recognized tribes here in California. Part of it becomes a thing of the haves and the have-nots to a certain extent, right? Because then it becomes a political, to me, it is a loss, right? Because what people are saying is the US government essentially is deciding who's Indian and who's not, even though tribes set their own criteria. You have to be recognized by the US government. And now some individuals are deciding that they get to speak on behalf of other tribes that they're not even members of, that they have the audacity to go into Ancestry.com as your research mechanism or tool. Like, that's pretty pathetic. And they don't know the history of a state like Louisiana or Virginia or North Carolina, where Indians were classified alongside mixed race Black folks because they were mixed people. Even if you know the story of Chief Buffalo Longlands, that people have called an imposter, right? He actually was mixed. He's this actor. He was very famous in Hollywood. People say he was trying to pass, because he was part Black, part white, but he's also part Native. He did create a fictive story about what tribes he belonged to. I think that was to distance himself from the area that he was from. But the fact that no one actually really talks about the fact that he is a multiracial or triracial person, though, to me is a problem. And most of the things that are written about today, even around Black Native identity, is more like, in this particular moment, particularly after George Floyd, I feel like, and missing murdered Indigenous women, these kind of contemporary issues, people are talking about, well, you can't have Black liberation without Indigenous self-determination. Well, Black people need self-determination and Indigenous people also need liberation, right? However, the other piece is we forget to talk about that there are Afro-Indigenous or African and American Indian people who are multi-generationally mixed. There are also those who are immediately biracial. And their stories, you know, kind of get pushed to the wayside. The other topic, and I don't want to veer too much off
No,
your
no,
thing,
go,
for a
please.
future, for a future talk, Latin America is a huge area where this needs to be discussed in Indian country in the US, because people are also being anti-Indian about those folks because, well, they're mestizos and they're not recognized by a government. I mean, not that this is about biology, because I think we can all agree on that. This is not about biology, it's about culture, and ancestry, I would say. But these folks are 60 and 70% Indian, and you're telling them they're not because they're not from a federally recognized. That's bullshit.
And where does it come from? Because I don't feel like that's something that we are inheriting from our ancestors, where it's like, I really, it just feels like at what point is this coming in as a European influence? Because I'm just so shocked by that.
I think from the very beginning, I mean, even this, right? So that we know we have tribes who are matrilineal and patrilineal, and that's always been the case. It's a part of people's clan systems, things like that. But it wouldn't mean that you weren't actually a part of that other tribe, right? Or that other community, but perhaps you lived in one because it was matrilineal, so you lived in that community. I think from the inception of contact, I would say that there has been this distortion of who people are. I mean, both those folks of African indigenous ancestry and American Indian indigenous ancestry, there's been this way in which religion, racial identity has all been clouded by colonization. So if you think about it, how do we know who we are? Everything that we've been told, a lot of it comes particularly through religion, interestingly enough, right? So there's a great book that I think speaks to what I'm getting at. It's called Missionary Conquest by George Tinker. And he talks about cultural genocide is actually even more powerful than actual physical genocide where you kill people, right? And he's talking about missionaries and native communities, but how you actually change the way that people think of themselves. And so I think that has been the biggest detriment of blood quantum and the one drop rule, is that other people have tried to define our communities and who we are. Why is this? I don't understand, to anyone like maybe who may hear this or whatever. You asked a very good question, right? Because why is there such animosity for people, and I would say the same, who want to reconnect to their African American ancestry or their American Indian ancestry? One of the people who's been the major proponent of this pretend Indian list, for example, says, well, I'm part French or I'm part Irish or whatever. You don't see me going around claiming Irish citizenship. I would love for that person. I think you need to claim your Irish ancestry and make a part of it. I think this is where citizenship becomes the problem. So as scholars, what we really need to be, and community people too, interrogating is it citizenship that we actually, because that is also not necessarily, I would say, either an African indigenous system or an American Indian one, right? Tribal system. These are things that were influences from outsiders, this whole notion of you are or you are not a citizen, right? People had a distinct sense of peoplehood, and that's what we write about in our book on Louisiana Creoles, is this idea of peoplehood as opposed to citizenship. So what is our connection to land, to people? What's the first thing you've experienced probably when you go down to Natchitoches? What do people say to you when they meet you?
They tell, to be completely honest, the first time I stepped on the city street, someone came up to me, wanted to say something. We had Tennessee Place and said, but you're a red bone. Literally had no idea what that was. And it happened again. And I actually talked to Professor Gregory at NSU, we emailed back and forth. He told me, he's like, that's a really offensive term. And I was like, well, I didn't even know to be offended, so it's fine. But I think you brought up such an important point about people who are reconnecting. So there's people who are taking DNA tests, or people who are digging in like I am. Okay, we didn't know anything, nothing. Do those people count, right? Because maybe, you didn't grow up culturally, and my family has intermarried up in New York now for a generation or two, so now we're further removed. And I think that the African American community, the Creole community, actually has been extremely welcoming to me. I think they recognize me when I don't recognize myself. Okay, but the Native American side, I'm treading carefully. I know I have connections to a lot of tribes, federal tribe, some Louisiana state ones, a lot of our family is like across the border, Mexico. I don't know what to do with it. And I think part of that is because it doesn't feel like you can go there. I feel like as soon as I mention it, people say, well, how much percent are you? How much? Nobody does that for my Sicilian side. My dad's got North African to sign. No one's like, how much North African are you? No one cares. As soon as you bring up Native American, they want to know. And if I don't have an answer or it's not a good enough answer, watch
But
out.
then people will tell you it's not about blood quantum, right? So there's this extreme. And so I know some of the other folks who would make the argument, they'd say what they're getting at, and they think citizenship is important and valuable because it's the way in which the tribes were marked, right? But not every tribe went through a process of treaty negotiation, which was one of the primary bases for recognition in the first place, was having established treaties, or that there are 7 different federal criteria to be a recognized tribe. Tribes basically, and even community members and academics who are supporting this notion, are actually basically saying, you know what, yeah, this is right. Because even though they would say they're not, they are. Because what they're saying essentially is that to people who are reclaiming and rediscovering, some would probably say, that's fine, they can. They're just not citizens of federally recognized tribes. And maybe they would say that's all they want them to say. Can they claim a native identity or native descent? Yes, they're fine. That's fine. If they claim it in a tribe that doesn't recognize them, they'll say that's a problem. The community has to accept them, right, as a part of that community. And so I agree to that point. Yes, the community that you're claiming needs to claim you back. I think, right?
Absolutely.
With Creoles or any other. And sometimes we know communities are racist and they're not going to accept you. So I think there is a point at which we have to have some refusal. Inheritance, what I like to talk about is inheritance refusals. What are the things that we've inherited, even if they're not from our own parentage or ancestors, but maybe from colonial benefactors, right? That we don't want, that we don't have to subscribe to, right? So one of the things, I'm a sociologist, and so one of the ways in which we talk about identity is there's ascribed, right? What other people tell us we are, and then there's sort of an achieved sense or what we learn, right, and come to grow up in. And I think that's the way to go, right? How limiting to tell. And so I remember this tribe that's not recognized up in the Shasta area here in California. And I remember we were at this film about salmon, and they're bringing the salmon back to their traditional areas. And they said, I don't need another government to recognize me, to tell me I exist. It's about resources. And so that's why there's so much fight going on here too. I think people see it as resources, like now, right, with all the discussions around reparations. I'm sure there's a bunch of people who now are going to be like, oh, I'm black, you know, people on their DNA thing, be like, okay, I'm 2%, you know. And you know what, if they are, and I think that's part of, maybe that's a good place to make the point that tribes might be saying, right, do you suffer the same way if you just found out today and you didn't go through these periods of American Indian history, like removal, you don't remember it like the family does, you don't remember, your family didn't live on a reservation, none of your ancestors went to boarding schools. So I think it's a both and, it's not an either or, and that's the problem, right? Is that yes, you have that experience, that's one experience of many possibilities for people who are of American Indian ancestry.
And I think it's important, at least in my experience, is just recognizing, again, there is a community experience of people who did not have the stereotypical Plains Indian Native American experience.
Right.
And the reason for that was because of these other issues of, you know, not everyone's, it wasn't great to raise your hand and say, yes, I'm Black, yes, I'm Native American. Only recently have we been able to even do that. What I'm doing really takes no boldness. Now, if we're talking 150 years ago, like suicide, or you're going to lose it's stupid, right? So I think people in Louisiana, my understanding as I'm learning is that there was a unique opportunity to blend into whatever you needed to blend into, an ability to camouflage yourself. And I think, you know, it's, I would never want to, you know, claim something I don't have. And I honestly, at this point, I identify as white, even though I'm finding out people don't really see me that way, just because that's how I was raised. That's my cultural experience. And I really can't claim anything else. But I'm curious for you. So you're working with a lot of nations. You're working with lab groups. Can you tell me about a time where you had a disagreement with a tribal member about blood quantum? How you handled that? You don't have to be specific, but I'm
Well,
curious.
interesting. No, I mean, I think the first one that came to mind was interestingly enough, and it is true that some of us are raised and told we're part of communities, tribal communities, perhaps, that we find out later we're not. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as we say, you know what, there's nothing here to substantiate. So anyway, years ago, I was told that we also had Choctaw ancestry years ago. So I remember I was in undergrad and college. I'm pretty young here too. That's the other thing people don't realize. It's like you're talking about young people. Like, why do you think that they just want to make this stuff up? I don't think everybody wants to make this up, particularly if you're talking about people who are also people of color. Like, you're already marginalized. Why do I want to take on another marginal identity? The whole reason people have asked me my whole life too, right? When they meet me, then they know it, or not my whole, but more so as a professor or academic. Oh, that's interesting. How'd you get into that? Right. So you have to explain and talk to them and tell them all these things. But really, I went into this field because I saw that there weren't a lot of people talking about it. Now here we are 20 something years later. There's a lot more people, but it is still a small fraction of people in academia who are doing Native American Indigenous studies. But I remember going to this group that was out in Bakersfield, California. It was a Choctaw, descendants group or whatever. And I remember someone said, "Oh," I think they asked my blood quantum maybe or something, or they said, "Well, you're black too, right?" And I'm like, "Well, you're white too, right?" Because I mean, it was funny because everybody there was white passing, and I was like, "But yet they'll be federally recognized." And that's the thing that also gets me is people don't make those connections, particularly in some of the southeastern states like Oklahoma, where you have people who are, there's your one drop rule, but then it's codified differently because they have lineal descent. You're 1, 2 thousands, whatever. But as long as you grew up in the community, you're part of it. That is kind of similar to Creoles, right? To some extent, I think. I do think though, if someone I've met many, many people over the years who did not know they were Creole because of their families. They moved in other states. They find out. I would never tell that person they're not Creole. I would say go explore the culture. Maybe you have a different experience of Creoleness than other folks, right? Because you didn't grow up in Louisiana, or maybe you did or didn't speak the language. But what ends up happening, and this is what I want to share with you, is in critical mixed race studies, there was an article done a long time ago about Japanese Americans that a mentor of mine wrote. The Japanese community might have to change its face to save its face. She studied Japanese American beauty pageants in San Francisco, Honolulu. Rebecca Kyoko King, her book's called Pure Beauty. And Becky was saying Japanese Americans, besides American Indians, have the highest rates of interracial marriage in the country.
Wow.
And these beauty pageants, they would say, well, they're getting less and less Japanese, right? Her point was, if we keep continuing to regulate Japaneseness on the basis of phenotype or whatever the thing is, right? If we limit what that is, eventually there won't be any Japanese Americans. And that was the goal of blood quantum, and that's what we see happening. And I would actually argue, folks, that that's also been happening in African American communities. The population's not growing, right? There's some African immigration to the U.S., but the population's not necessarily growing, right? So it's Black people who were afraid of having a multiracial category on the census. Not all, some, right? Who opposed having a 2 or more race category or a multiracial category,
right?
Because it would dilute African American numbers. I've always said, if we don't actually acknowledge it, though, that's when we have more and more people that, as they get to the 3rd and the 4th generation or whatever it might be, might not even take that long. They won't even know they're Black anymore, right? So actually, why don't we, instead of avoid it, talk about it? Same thing with tribes. Why would we avoid people who find out, that they have American Indian ancestry? Should they be taking, getting scholarships or things like that because of that? No, no, right? I don't think initially. I think if they become a part of communities and they're recognized by a tribe that they find their ancestry in, then at some point, yes, they could do that. But if you just take a DNA test and are like looking for a check, as I've heard people say that too, that's a problem.
Right.
So a lot of this is also about intention.
Yeah.
And well-being, right? Ancestral well-being. Like, why do we want to know more? Do we want this, is this knowledge and this connection to actually help and to do, and when I say help, it shouldn't be in a paternal way or to take up space. It should be that you're invited in. So like if I went to Louisiana when I was first, because I didn't grow up there either, right? And I'm half Creole, right? I don't believe in half, whole, quarters, whatever. But and it's interesting, and I have darker skin for quote unquote Creole, although even though people have said, oh, you look totally Creole, you look the older people because they have darker skin and straighter hair or whatever. But I wouldn't just presuppose to walk into that community where I didn't grow up and say, oh, what do we need to do? You have to ask. And so I think that's also a big thing that a lot of American Indian communities are asking, is that people ask permission, and not just kind of take up space if they're doing rediscovery work or reconnection work. And so I think that's important, and that we be honest about where we are and what we do know. I think, yes, if someone knowingly knows they have no connection to something and they continue, maybe they thought they did, and they find out later there is no connection there. As long as they say that and they don't continue to pretend, why do we have to make that? I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't. Again, it's about people's intention. And then there's others who really, we know historically this colliding of blood quantum and one drop rule has made it very difficult for people of both African and Native descent to be both, right? And to talk about that. And the fact that this is still an issue is, unfortunate. But if you look at the Americas, that is who we are in the Americas. That is what this continent has been. It's the blending from, even up in Canada, but definitely in the US and particularly the Southeast, and even the Southwest. The Genesee Sato people are like, all these people were blending in the Southwest as well with people of African descent, but all across Nicaragua, the whole Atlantic coast of Latin America is full of Black Indians. But that doesn't get talked about that much.
Well, that's a phrase that you say that I have seen that come up in comments over and over and over again. I'm actually going to do another video on it with my cousin. But I would love you to kind of just encapsulate what that means, because I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What does a Black Indian mean to you?
Well, it's
How
funny,
are you using it?
I actually have issues with the term, so it's funny I mentioned it in this context, because Black to me is a political term, mostly, not necessarily an ethnic one. And so if I say Afro-Indigenous or something like that, but then it seems like an oxymoron because people of African descent are Indigenous, which is the other thing that people in Native or Indian country need to stop doing, is that people who are, so there's stuff that folks in Black community need to stop doing, because they're also saying we're the original peoples and we're the real American Indians, this sort of Israelite kind of sort of Abraham followers, I guess, these different folks who are basically taking on indigenous identities and things like that. But Black Indian, I have told people that I don't like the term too, because we don't call people white Indians. And so as soon as you say Black Indian, you have marked someone as another type of Indian, which means they're not a real Indian. So until we start calling people like white Indian or Mexican Indian, people try to tell me they do use that. And I'm like, no, they don't, not really. I don't hear that. And then other people have said they really like the term, like a colleague of mine, Jennifer Vest, who writes on a lot of this. She's Black and Seminole, Muskogee Creek. She's written a lot about these topics and about Two-Spirit people too, actually, as well, which there's an interesting overlap in this conversation with Two-Spirit identity, because that's something else that colonization tried to wipe out. But, she says it's also a source of pride to be able to mark the coming together of both identities. So when they founded the Black Native American Association, like this was, going 40 years ago, going on 40 years, I think, almost now. Wow. Her and Don Davenport, Little Cloud, and other people who were involved in that. I'm one of the other women, her name's escaping me right now, but there was a source of pride, I think, at one time to use the term Black Indian. And so it's interesting, because I think people maybe have also moved away from it because Black can be thought of in a pejorative way, like people associate it negatively. I can have talked to a lot of friends who are from the Dominican Republic who to avoid their blackness, actually will say in Spanish that they are Indio Oscuro. You know, right? You know what that means. So it's like,
I just it's just
excuse me?
amazing.
What? I'm like, what are you talking about, right? So it's yeah.
But it's coming out of a reaction from something, right? It's not just ex nihilo. Like they're reacting to something that they don't like, or they don't want to identify with. And I don't think it's necessarily right the color. It's just what is this phrase insinuating about someone?
Right. And it's not even like a super identification as thinking I'm an Indian person either. That's the funny part. It's just saying I'm a dark. I think it really is a codification that I'm not black. And I have dark skin because somewhere over here I had some Indians in the closet, but I'm Dominican. Right. It's very much more nationalistic. Cuba, I think, is a similar kind of, you know, the Caribbean area there, I think is, you know, that's very similar. But then you go again, I think when you go into the Atlantic coast, La Rama, Nicaragua, Bluefields, that area, Colombia, all these places have intact, undisturbed almost, right? That just kind of pushed outsiders out, kind of like Creoles tried to do, right? Not as successfully, I think, as like Lumbees or others, because maybe they would be recognized right now as a tribal community in some ways. But they continue these traditions that people were doing in West Africa 500 years ago that they don't even do in that country in Africa anymore. You see them doing it in Colombia or Brazil. And this is part of what's happening. I would say even some of the stuff we see with Carnival and Mardi Gras, right, is also a thing. The whole discussion, I sent you that video because that film's being shown on Mardi Gras Indians. Are they appropriating? And it's like, actually, because I was just talking to some folks about this, some of the Creole professor friends. And I said, well, actually, not really. I think because they are Native heritage, but they've been told they can't identify with it. This is the other piece we need to talk about. How many Black folks who don't say they're Native because they're told they can't say it, right? And so I remember myself and two other colleagues, actually the two other co-editors of this Louisiana Creole Peoplehood book, we're in New York for this event on Puerto Rico, New Orleans, and natural disasters. We're talking about race and the intersection of environmental, climate change, and disaster, and how it impacts Native communities, Black communities, Afro-Indigenous or Black Indian communities in Puerto Rico and, you know, like Louisiana, right? So this famous jazz musician, who I won't name, we're backstage talking, and he's involved with Mardi Gras scene and the masking and Black Indians, and he's like, "Them people never accepted me. I'm not an Indian or whatever." Blah blah blah. Right? And so my partner at the time is a professional genealogist, and actually had said, "I brought your genealogy chart with me." Because he was a very big fan of this guy and just thought this was special. The guy, he's like, "Look, your grandmother showed him that he was, and what tribe I think he was even had information on for him." Long story short, the conversation broke down, and the guy even acknowledged it when we went outside and talked about finally feeling like, oh, I can be a part of something and not feel like people are telling me I'm not this, right? That I can only be this thing. But the Mardi Gras Indians, I feel like the costuming, for example, that they do might have some influence from tribal, you know, sort of cultures, but it's all new creations, right? They're not actually doing the thing where I see people who put on planes, headdresses, and all this stuff that's not the same thing. They've actually invented their own thing. It's actually something uniquely new. And it does come out of, I would say, that history at Congo Square, where the Black and Indigenous peoples there that were gathering then for Mardi Gras way back when, that's where that comes from. So we have to, I've always said we have to look at culture and cultural practice, not just race. So I think that's the other problem in these conversations about blood quantum, one drop rule. They're both about blood, right? They're not about culture. So that's why I asked, when you go to, you know, Natchitoches or Louisiana, what do they ask you first? Who are your people? Right? And that's the same thing that happens in every tribal community too, right? Is I want to know how I'm connected to you. It's not all, if people aren't doing it most times, most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, they're not asking because they want to make sure, check you out, make sure you belong here. They want to know, how can I invite you in and how are we connected? You got it, your family. So that's what people do. Like, say you're at a powwow in an urban Indian context, or even in a rural or reservation context. If it's not the tribes, powwow, obviously they probably know each other, but it's really like asking, like, who are you and how are we connected? And I think that's what we should be focusing on. That's what peoplehood is this sense of, maybe it's how we're related, or what do we have in common, as opposed to this is all about what's different. The census itself has historically been a mess, right? Talking about the same household where one person's mulatto, the other person's white, somebody's an Indian. In Indian households on those census records, like in the Dawes Act, you have siblings with the same parents with different blood quantum fractions. I mean, for people to not actually acknowledge that problem and how pervasive it actually was, I think is another issue here. And so at the end of the day, if we don't focus on culture and cultural connection as meaning making for group membership, whether it's Black, Creole, Native, all of them mixed together, then those groups won't continue to exist, because at some point, every tribe would have to change their blood quantum requirement to lineal descent. There's not going to be 25%, 50%. Even now, I know I have friends who are tribal chair. I remember from a California tribe, he was chair of his tribe, very successful gaming tribe here. And I remember we went to grad school and he goes, yeah, my blood quantum says I'm 3/4 or whatever it is. He's like, my mom's, no, his dad. My dad's Mexican. We can't be from, he's not even from our tribe. And my mom, I think his mom is not full blood. So he's like, how did I get to be 3/4? So even he would acknowledge that. That's one example, but that's almost everybody's experience. I just the whole notion of, and to say someone's full blood, that just, I don't know.
It gives me a little bit of an ick. I'm just gonna say, like, I have a little bit of an ick with this. Professor Caldwell, I bother him all the time because a lot of my family line goes to the Choctaw Apache tribe. I'm not enrolling. This is kind of like probably my hill to die on right now. I just am not comfortable with it for a lot of reasons. I think one, being an outsider, I feel like the gesture I want to make is I'm not coming in to take up space. I want to just kind of know who we are. I have kids. I want them to know who they are because we've had 2 generations of my family not knowing anything. But like the enrolling side, I would love for you to speak on this a little bit, because I know that you are part of a tribal community, right? And it's important to be a part of the community, which I love that. I love finding how we're connected, where my new cousins are, so many cousins. I feel like this is just such a like minefield. I feel like, how do you feel about the enrollment sans blood quantum? And if it was up to you, like if it was just like tomorrow we could eradicate blood quantum, where do you think that would leave the state of affairs for American Indian nations? If we woke up tomorrow, blood quantum's gone, we still have maybe lineal descent, we're still connected through ancestry, it's gone. What does it look like tomorrow and going forward for Native communities?
I think as long as tribes still have the ability to decide who is and isn't a member, which I think that's all we need, right? Why does it matter how much someone is, in terms of engaging with the community? And so I think it'd be a much better space, and I think more tribes actually would need to be recognized as well. The problem is the whole basis for for tribal status is actually based on blood quantum to some extent, right? So for tribes that are seeking recognition still, I'm thinking just even here in California, where we know they have the records to document their ancestry, it's on the basis of blood quantum, right? And so why is that? Why can't tribes, like any other community, say who they are, right? That is because of this legal history and this particular relationship with the US federal government. But the problem is it's oxymoronic, because the federal government still supersedes tribal authority in most cases, right? And so I think, we could do away with blood quantum. What we really need to do is actually establish true sovereign status for tribal groups, right? So that they're not beholden to the US government or any other government other than their own. And then I think tribes they can, and that historically is what happened. That's why people had folks that were part of their tribes that weren't Indian by blood or whatever the tribe was, Choctaw by blood. They had members who were not like that. So I don't think that blood quantum has always been a factor for tribal communities. So if we got rid of it tomorrow, I think it would do a lot to focus again more on culture as opposed to race. I think it might help with issues of exclusion, which are huge. We haven't even a whole other topic. I mean, you're right. We could be talking about this for hours because there's the whole topic of disenrollment.
Right.
People, I have former students whose, I remember her family got disenrolled, California tribe. Her grandmother, someone had to translate because she was one of the last speakers of their tribe's language, and they told them they're Mexican. I'm like, come on. Are you serious? This is an elder, speaks the language, you're kicking them out. This is the internalization and the monetization of tribal identity too, I think. And so, and that's even the people talking about the pretend Indian list. They say all they're worrying about is because people are benefiting monetarily off of this. To me, it's already, some of that's hateration too, and they're mad because they want to be making, they're trying to make money off of this. And that's not what you should be doing. That's not the goal. Your goal is to actually be out there doing something in community.
Absolutely.
Like, a lot of that stuff started too during COVID, you know? Or why would you attack someone who's dead? I mean, I guess if you want to set the historical record, you're saying straight, I guess. But does it, at this point, who are you hurting and who are you helping by talking about Sasheen Littlefeather and whether she's a
I was
native?
just thinking when that came out, I was actually really stressed. One of the things I talked to my husband about, because his dad is Mexican and Puerto Rican and his mom's English. So he gets all of this stuff where I have to just unload all the stuff. But he has a much more of an attitude of who cares what people say? Don't let it bother you. But for me, one of the biggest things is I have the catch-22 of, do I engage and connect with the native heritage that like my mom didn't get to grow up with, my grandmother didn't get to grow up with, and kind of bring a full circle. But the risk is I really do not want to be a Rachel Dolezal or attaching, but Sasheen Littlefeather, they were Mexican. And I'm like, Mexicans are indigenous. I mean, like,
The
usually
Apache
a
are
lot.
on both sides of the border.
I'm like, that's just,
yeah. The
it's
Yaqui, two tribes are on that border.
yeah. So that one really, like, I saw people like throwing that around like they had a gotcha. And I'm like, this is not a gotcha. It's making y'all look really bad.
And I'm pretty sure someone actually did find, you know, ancestral documented, right? Because they're saying they can find documented. They found documented that she was part of, I believe it's the Yaqui tribe. So
of course she was. It's just like the gotchaism, I think, is really.
And what does it start? What is that going to do other than, to be honest, some of the people doing it, not all, are themselves attention seeking, and that's why they go after someone like a Sasheen Littlefeather, because she's a bigger fish, right? To kind of go after. They've gone after Winona LaDuke, very well-known people, you know. But I want to go back to your question because I didn't finish answering, and I actually saw your video, which I really loved your discussion of enrollment. I actually believed the same thing as you for a long time, and I actually was like, even DNA test. I refused DNA testing for many, many years because I was like, why? I don't need that. What is that going to tell me, right? But I was curious about family and cousins, so I eventually relented and said, like in the last year or two, and did it. And I was like, oh, I want to, you know, find stuff. And so it's been interesting to find relatives and for those discussions and kind of get a sense. But it basically told me what I kind of already knew. I wasn't surprised by anything. But in terms of enrollment, I also was always like, I don't need to be enrolled because that's almost like me agreeing with the system that I think is a problem. The only reason I'm a citizen of the United States is because, well, they forced us to, right? That's how we go, and you have to get through the system, right? And so I think that's also the point tribes are making, is they want to show that distinction that this is not about race, ethnicity. It is about citizenship, they would say. So in order to get through the system of a tribally recognized nation, then and that's fine. I don't need that part though necessarily. I think you're right. I don't think we have to enroll to do that. This is the catch-22. It is it's the only mechanism for resources though, right? So how do the tribes become self-sustaining?
You mean as far as tribal members being a part of the tribe? You mean like as far as...
Well, and then even federal recognition, right? So how do tribes initially get the source of funds that they have has been through monies that have come through U.S. government. And then through the 1970s and policy changes, things like that, obviously tribes have their own resources, but not all, right? Many tribes are still very heavily reliant on federal funding for everything from healthcare. Like, so all these people out here who think, oh, I'm Indian, let me get my check. I'm like, not everybody's getting a check, first of all. There's still very extreme poverty and difficult conditions in many, many, many tribal communities. Some are doing well with gaming and other business enterprises, golf courses and resorts and hard rock cafes.
Yeah, I will say that even those who have casinos, like I taught on the Dene Reservation for a while, and I would drive students home because it was a boarding school, like I don't know, boarding school, but it was like they lived at the school because where they live, they're hogans, stuff, no running water, dirt floors. And I would have to drop these students off on Friday, knowing they had no electricity for the whole weekend. No, and you know, it just and I'm not Dene, like I'm not Navajo, but I wanted to, I didn't know where I belonged at that point. This was like I had to teach for America right out of college, and I knew like, well, I know I have Indigenous heritage somewhere. Like, I just want to go spend time and like work in the community. And it was really eye-opening because I would say the Navajo Nation is one of the most like they've kept it together, you know, and even they have situations where like the poverty is so shocking that I think anyone who's going into this thinking that they're going to get some Indian money, it's like, you know, we need more people to shoulder the burden. Is really what needs to happen.
Somebody said that, I think, the other day. They're like, about Heather Rae. She's the Hollywood director and actress, and she's one of the people that's been called out. And I remember, I think the New York Post just had a story on her. And one of the things that someone said in there, they're like, "Where's the money trail that you guys keep talking about? How are you showing? Where are these people getting rich that you really think? Unless you're talking about Cher, who they've tried to say is, you know, or Johnny Depp. Okay, they're rich people. They're not rich because they said they were an Indian. And then no one else is getting rich off saying they're an Indian or making tons of money. Maybe scholarships, I could see them saying that if someone got a scholarship. But most of the most prestigious scholarships actually do require that you be enrolled. And so you'd have to document that or at least have a CDIB card and be 25%. But yeah, I agree with you on enrollment. I don't, you know, it's only necessary in terms of being able to access resources. So I think that's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I just, you know, I'm not totally sure about. I'm willing to be wrong on this. I guess it's just my gut feeling is just like I don't love it, but
well, it's icky because what it is the same thing. So people who have critiqued citizenship, colonization, imperialism, all these sort of structures we've created, which you would think, right? Oh, Native people would be opposed to, but we have to remember Native people have been, for the most part, really that have taken on. Most Native people are Republicans. They're very conservative, right? And so they've taken on a lot of these.
I've never heard. I did not know that.
Wow. Some of the people believe that there was a shift in that, and it's because of Richard Nixon, because a lot of legislation was passed under his administration. I think that was mostly because of Alcatraz, though, and so he had no choice but to pass it. It was also because of Indian activism.
Right.
Yeah, there's, you know, otherwise, if you think citizenship is actually a way of saying who belongs and who doesn't, which is what we do now, right? Look at immigration as an issue. That's awful. Citizenship is actually not a good thing. So that's what enrollment is. So we need to talk about that, right? Enrollment is citizenship. And so does citizenship automatically mean I think we need to actually be critical of what citizenship is.
I agree. And
understand.
I don't want to, I have like 200 years worth of questions, but I told you I was going to keep it right at 7. So last question. If you could, and I'm sure I'm going to be like, please talk to me again so we could follow up. But if you could tell your younger self anything about this as a young man, what would you say to yourself? Or what do you wish you knew starting the journey?
I would wish and tell my younger self, be patient, listen and trust your ancestors. Don't let anyone tell you who you can and cannot be. That there will be people who will say racist things or you know, be prejudiced along your journey, even professionally, who will challenge your right to exist and to be present. And you have the right, I would tell my younger self to, that you have the right, Andrew, to push back and to actually claim that space and to be there. And that's actually what I would share with you too is, everybody has their own journey and their own walk. And I think as long as you are doing things in a respectful way, which I clearly can see you are, in a very thoughtful and intentional way, claim it's fine, perfectly fine to claim. I think this nuanced conversation has really been about how we're claiming it, right? And this, because ultimately, if your goal is not, and I don't think most of us, particularly mixed race people, I don't think our goal is citizenship or enrollment. Like I don't want to need to be enrolled to be black, so why do I need to be enrolled to be native? I don't need to be enrolled to be French. I'll gladly go to France and tell people I'm French. People think, oh, you just want to say you're native and not talk. I will gladly. I've gone to Ireland because I'm like I will tell them.
I
And
think
so
it's like we're Irish. I'm like, I want to go to Ireland. Like, I don't care if they like it or not. Like, I'm from there too. It's all of it coming together. And
it is.
why don't we claim all of the pieces instead of focusing so much? We focus so much on the native thing is such a like, I don't know. It's like a zeitgeist in the culture. It's like
it's in this country in particular, and we probably would see this like in Australia and Canada too, where there's that force, that conflict, right? Because ultimately this conversation is at the end of the day too about a history where this government tried to eradicate native people from the face of the United States, and so that's that fight to kind of maintain that. But again, this is my caution and my warning, like Rebecca King said about Japanese American communities. The American Indian community needs to change its face in order to save its face, or there won't be any Indians left, right? Because at some point, like I said, if we're looking at citizenship, blood quantum at the very least is gonna have to go out the window. There's just no sustainable way, right, in which the DNA is one of the few exceptions probably where people have such a high blood quantum concentration, but that's because they've maintained isolation from a lot of other folks. And that's also why there's a lot of pervasive racism, though, too. I just saw Red Cody yesterday, right? The famous, right, Danae African American singer who's been trying to do some environmental or cleanup work, and someone wrote the N-word about her on some sign that was apparently another Navajos, right? So there is a lot of work to still be done. And of course, I mean, I shouldn't put it out there in that way. It's not like, there's not racism still anywhere, right? It's everywhere, right?
It is everywhere. But blood quantum is not keeping this out. Like, this is happening. People are mixing, and I don't want a world where the next generation doesn't feel like they can marry who they love because they're afraid about the blood quantum of the grandchildren. That is worse than Jim Crow when I'm thinking about that is just because it's the people doing it to themselves. And I think, how does that happen? And I know I don't have a place publicly to say that, but I mean, just between me and you, like, I just am really, it's shocking to me to think about that. So it's kind of almost like, we're just all agreeing to eradicate. This is the terms of our agreement, and we'll see when it happens. It's not an if, but when, right?
It's coming. I mean, it's coming. And so it becomes a matter of, and that's why you see people posturing in the general US population. That's why there's so many fights over the Hispanic category, Middle Eastern, because they all, right? Mexicans, Cubans, Puerto Ricans, the largest Latino groups all identify as white. There's a reason for that. That's why they want Middle Eastern. I was going to tell you too, really quickly. We actually, years ago, we're actually going to do a census for Creoles, actually. The only benefit I see of like a census or enrollment, or like a membership card type thing we were trying to do for Creoles, so we could document the numbers, right?
Right.
There's other ways to do that. It doesn't mean like, oh, you're not you can't be a Creole, it wasn't like that. It was really just to kind of let people, So I think at the end of the day, there's this distinction between self-identification. That's probably the one thing we didn't talk about, and community recognition, right? So it's not about the individual, it's about the community. And I think that's a good place to probably kind of maybe end it. Is I do think that the folks on this sort of other side of things that are kind of pushing back and saying, well, people who have the ancestor way, way back can't just walk up here and be like, oh, I'm an Indian. I think that's right? I think they're saying you can't just be like, oh, I'm individual walking around and I'm an Indian, It's like you need to also have a connection to a community. So I think that is totally legit. And I think the question then becomes, how do we continue to maintain that as blood quantum becomes a thing that we can't even use to measure who's a member or not? It's right how you right, because we still have blood quantum, right? If we're still using 25% for most tribes, at some point nobody's going to be 25%, right?
Yeah, right. Unless you're making decisions on who you marry.
You can't keep marrying your cousin like the Creoles did.
Well, you can, but
at a certain point, something's gonna go wrong though.
like that's why there's like 200 Guillories. Never heard of the last name in my life.
Correct.
Now I'm like, I'm figuring it out. But thank you. I feel like my soul really just feels so fed. I was so nervous going into this because this one just really, I want to treat it right. I want to treat it right. And I don't have a voice in it, but I do feel like a lot of people are in the spot where they're coming up against it and it's new to them. And they don't really even know, how do you interact with this? So it's kind of everybody trying to figure out how to interact with this in 2023. It's like, yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for letting me like take you from your family and all of those things. I appreciate you so much. And
my pleasure. Yeah. No, I really appreciate this. So yeah, I'll keep following and seeing the stuff you're doing. I really like how you're talking about these issues in nuanced ways. Yeah.
So thank you. And if you ever have anything where you're like, because I think what your book, I love reading, like I'm up, I have your books, I've my Elizabeth Shown Mill books, I've got all of like the Louisiana situation on my nightstand. But this is I feel like there's just so many ways to speak to people. And I feel like adding video and any way you can to get the message out. And so I'm just so glad to have a chance to have you be able to speak this way to my audience. So thank you. And I'll send it to you and we'll just
my friend actually wants to show in his class at Dartmouth because I guess apparently they're talking about a similar topic. He's like, because I told them, so I was like, oh, Daryl, you guys are gonna do, and I showed you the video that you did the preview for this, and they're like, oh, this is perfect for my class. So I was like, okay, well, I think it's recorded probably, so I'll send it to you guys.
I'll have it edited probably the next day or so I'll send it over to you. And thank you so much. I appreciate you. We'll talk soon. Thank you. Thanks.
Take care.
You too. Bye.